Hello and welcome to the Nash Tackle Off the Hook podcast. Just to make you aware, this podcast may contain some explicit/offensive language, and if that's not your thing, you don't have to listen, but I have given you a warning. I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
You don't know the half of it, but anyway. I'm skating on the thinnest ice known to man.
He said, and they put a poison in the tank that just instantly kills them. He went and we'd run out of it, so we cut their heads off with shovels.
Suddenly, bang! The whole boat exploded.
Take your sort of 8-inch long piranha and imagine that at 4, 5, maybe 6 feet.
I said, I've revived your dead fish. F off, he said. You haven't.
That was just humongous. It was... I couldn't believe what I was looking at.
I'm just battling this fish out, and I know it's a black man. I'm saying I'll never be a naughty boy again.
If you catch fish and you return them to the water, then you are my brother.
John Timmermans, welcome to the Nash podcast, mate. How the devil are you?
Good, mate, and thank you for having me. Yeah, really good.
It's an absolute honour to have you, mate. There's a lot to talk about, but first of all, I have been a avid watcher of your content for a very, very, very long time, mate. Those vlogs have been, amazing, mate. They've been brilliant.
So you're the one that's been watching them?
Over and over and over and over again.
You're
mate.
the one that's got all those views up, right?
Me single-handedly. No, they're absolutely brilliant, mate. I've enjoyed them thoroughly. I've enjoyed watching them on typography as well. They've been recently launched over the back of that. And obviously there's things to talk about in the future with regards to them, mate. But apart from that, in the sort of relative comparative now, how have you been? What have you been up to?
Yeah, amazing. I mean, I think first of all, I've got to say, whoever it was in Nash who decided to take a punt on me, I don't know who it was. I've no idea. All I got was the text from Henry, do you want to come on board, blah, blah, blah. So I've got to say a massive thanks to whoever that was for bringing me into the team.
You've killed my exclusive announcement, John, haven't you? My exclusive announcement was a big drum roll. He's now joined Nash. What has gone on in your head there?
Oh, my God. I thought you were going to skip that part.
No, but... yeah, you basically got a text from Henry saying, do you want to join the team?
Yeah, exactly.
You've had 20 beers, lost your mind and thought, yes.
No. I mean, who in their right mind is going to turn down a job working for Nash, in all honesty? I don't do a lot of fishing. So to be supported in kind of documenting what I do and, my passion for carp fishing is something pretty special to me.
Yeah.
So it's a massive thanks to whoever it was that decided to take a punt on me.
Well, I think, mate, Nash will definitely benefit from having you on board. Totally, mate. So it's reciprocal.
I didn't get loads of offers, but I did get a couple of offers. And the Nash way, let's call it the way of thinking, suits how I fish. If I think I do a lot of boat work, rod's perfectly suited for boat with the scopes. Changed my fishing completely. I'm a very mobile angler. I get bored ever so easily sitting in the same spot. All of the Nash stuff is suited to how I fish. Yep. So it was kind of the obvious choice for me, so to speak. So yeah, onwards and upwards from here. I'm still just getting my feet under the table, but it's been a really good first year at Nash.
First time here, though, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
And you've had a few sessions. We'll talk about sort of the start, if you like. But if we go back a little bit, you said there initially, like, fishing is not your main source of income in your living. You've obviously got a job as well. You're a working man. You've got a family.
Yeah.
There's lots of other constraints on your time. But obviously a lot of people will know you, as I hinted before, from the vlogs you did for CC Moores. So talk me through the decision, if you like, when you were approached by Henry and Nash. Why that was a more sort of suited fit rather than carry on what you were doing with CC Moores?
So I've been with CC Moore a long, long time.
Yeah.
And brilliant company. Can't fault them as a bait company in any way, shape or form. They were absolutely brilliant. They were very loyal with me and they were very patient with me. You don't always have good sessions. And they always supported me. So massive thanks to Ian and the team over at CC Moore. But I've been with them for a long time, okay? Yeah. Everyone in life wants to make a step up in whatever they do. I've obviously got my professional career away from fishing, and I've always had that. And to be honest with you, I probably always want to keep that. But to take the step from just a bait company to a bait and tackle company who have got so much more history, so much more about them. You know, I've been carp fishing for over 30 years now, and Kevin Nash, I used to use the real early Scopex squids from the 90s. They were actually called squid livers back then. And in the tackle shop, they had the Amber Attractor, the Sting, the Monster Pursuit, all those. So to actually think that literally 25 years later, I'm actually being sponsored with them, it was an obvious choice. It's an obvious step up in the fishing world for me. Yeah. And I'm not getting any younger. I'm 42 now. I'd like to hope I've got a good sort of 10, 15 years more of the same ahead of me. It was a bit of a no-brainer, to be honest with you.
Yeah? Fair dues.
Yeah, 100%.
For you said there, obviously, you started with us for the best part of a year now. Is that right? Near enough?
No. To be fair, I think it was sort of March, April time that I came on board. So 3/4 of a year.
And you've had a few trips out, obviously, a few adventures fishing, which you've documented and maybe coming to Nash TV pretty soon.
100%, yeah. So let's just try and remember. So I don't know if anyone can remember the springtime, but I was quite fortunate this spring that I had 2 weekends over in France. Normally I get, and this is probably going to be a theme of this podcast, is me moaning about how little fishing I get to do. But normally I get a spring trip, a summer trip with the family, and then an autumn trip on my own. So the spring trip and the autumn trip are well and truly dedicated to carp fishing. And the summer trip will be a little bit of family time as well as trying to nab the odd night or the odd early morning here and there.
Are they weeks or are they longer?
No. Again, this is, dare I say, a bit of a bugbear of mine. I get between 5 and 7 days in the spring and 5 and 7 days in the autumn.
Awesome, okay.
Occasionally it molds into maybe 8 or 9. Not in recent. not. If you know how it is. If you feel like you're onto something.
How have those calls been?
Had
to
the
missus?
Occasional phone calls.
What have you gone for? What's how does that play
normally
out?
it's something to do with the car breaking down.
Good angling.
But normally I get 5 to 7 days in the spring. This spring, I had a 2-day, basically 2 weekends. I don't know if you can remember, but in March of this year, we basically had a real warm 2 weeks at the end of March. And I thought, right, we're on for it. And my wife was taking the children up north to see some friends. So I had that weekend. And just as April turned, we had a cold spell. And it was basically between -3 and -5 at night, and between 1 and 4 during the day. And in rural France, you can basically take 2 degrees off that. It was so cold. There was literally probably 6 inches of snow slush everywhere I was going. It was the worst possible weekend. I had a few fish, nothing big, and I was. Let's go into a little bit of detail. I was fishing canals in northern France.
Okay,
I've never really fished the northern France canals before, and there was the obvious place to go when you've only got a couple of nights ahead of you. It's a short distance. You know, it's literally 2 hours or so from Calais. So I had that weekend, didn't really go so well because of the weather, but I did have a few. Then I had the Jubilee weekend. No, let's cut back. Before the Jubilee weekend, I had my proper session at the end of May. Because that happened, I think, maybe the second week of June. So in mid-May, I had 6 nights in France, and basically from that cold spell in April, we didn't have a spring this year. It just went straight into summer, straight into summer, and it went from like one day it was -3 degrees, the next day it was 15 degrees, the next day it was 30 degrees, and it stayed 30 degrees from April all the way through until September. It's unbelievable. So I think global warming was a little bit part of this last year we've had. And because it was so hot, I mean, sometimes on these trips you have a project, sometimes you have an adventure.
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes you just go with the flow and crack on with it, not really having a plan in place, whereas other times, right, tunnel vision, it's a proper focus on the water. And depending on the time of year, in springtime now, France is getting busier and busier. We've got to accept that, and I'm obviously part of that promoting videos. But it was more an adventure this spring, and I wanted to head for some flowing water. So I dropped back on a place that I haven't visited in over 10 years. Fast flowing water, river, city centre. People will recognise it when the video comes out. And it's day only fishing. When I went there a decade ago, they were far more relaxed about the night fishing. These days, there's all sorts of guards, police, everyone, keeping an eye on the carp anglers. So it was day only fishing. No problem with that. And I did the river in 2 different spots for the first 2 or 3 days. And I was quite fortunate. I fell on them straight away. And I probably had maybe 10, 12 carp up to maybe 43, 44.
No,
real amazing
incredible.
river carp. Absolutely incredible river carp. And most of them were mirrors as well. And I prefer I prefer a mirror to a common, if I'm all honest. So I did that for a couple of days, and after I felt like I'd had the best of it, and basically the barbel came in. You've got to be ever so careful. If the barbel and the catfish come in on the rivers,
Gone.
the carp can move off very quickly. People talk about the baiting
Pyramid, and all this.
Yeah.
You don't find that?
I'm not a massive advocate of that, if I'm honest.
Especially cats. Surely those cats are massive, mate. They're going to push carp.
Yeah, I didn't. Later on in the trip, I caught some real big ones, over 90 pounds. But in those first couple of days, they were between 20 and 40. So, but they can still nail. They can put a couple of kilos away very quickly. And once they come in, I think the barbel are more of a problem, to be honest. You've got to remember you're fishing big leads, you're fishing big hooks, and you're fishing breakaway. So you need a lot of leads, you need a lot of hooks. And when you've been driving all night and you get a run of barbel coming into the swim, it can become very difficult. And I was absolutely exhausted. After 2 days, the carp had definitely dropped back. There was still a few about, but the barbel and the cats were just abundant. And I moved on. I went further south. It's worth also noting that this was around the time of spawning, and I was trying to pick places where they hadn't started.
Yeah.
You don't want to be on places when they're spawning. One, it's not, it's their one chance to get their leg over during the year.
Yeah.
And you're fishing for them. So I wanted to try and keep out of that. So I moved to the deep south, to a lake. It's been on what I call the kind of social media vine. Part grapevine, part social media. It's been in the cycle for a few years, but it probably hasn't come out massively. And so I dropped in on there, and the plan was that I was going to stay there. Now, there happened to be a Belgian angler on the lake. It's 60 acres in size, this lake. You wouldn't think one angler is a massive issue on 60 acres, but if you know the layout of the lake and the fact that boats are allowed, and this guy, to be fair to him, he knew the lake inside out. He'd been there loads of times before. He had his baits right across. He was literally covering
the whole lake.
Almost the whole lake, and I had to offer up a compromise on where I could go, and he had to move one of his lines to let me in.
On a 60-acre lake?
Yeah, it was one of those. He had them right across, and I felt like any carp coming my way were going to be cut off. Yeah, he was stitching me up. He was there first. He moved his rod. We had a piece together. He was a lovely guy. But it didn't offer me up the sort of water that I felt I needed. I stayed one night, didn't have anything on the first night, moved to a day-only area for the second night, just chucked the rods out. I had a terrapin, God.
Oh, good angling.
Yeah.
A good one? How big? PB?
You know what? I've got 2 terrapins for it. Was probably about so big, poor little thing.
You got to edge up the PBs, go slowly, mate. You don't want to blow it out the water with a big old leatherback.
And on this lake, in the second day, it seems to be a theme that the wind blows in a certain direction. It was certainly a theme while we were there, and it was packing it into the place where I'd done the night. And I went back and there were a few carp rolling tight on my left-hand side. You know, I boated a couple of rods out, but I could actually flick this one just up the margin, so to speak. And it was no surprise that it went off just on dusk that evening. And it was a lovely fish. It was just a long common of just under 40.
No.
Oh, really nice fish. And straight after that night, I was getting bleat, 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 bleat all night. And basically the carp had started spawning.
Right.
They'd come right into my bank. They were going up and down. In fact, there were some really nice kois in amongst these commons and mirrors. And there were also a lot of small fish that I didn't know lived in the lake. It's amazing what you see when they're spawning.
Yeah, of course.
You have this vision of what you've seen caught on the place and the sort of average stamp of fish. And there were loads of smaller ones, which I couldn't believe. But anyway, that was it for me. I wound in, did the off. And again, I moved on to another lake up the road. Goodness me, I was going through the real detail. Another lake up the road. It was one of patience on there. You know, I arrived in the afternoon. Big carp in there, definitely big carp. But
what are we talking? What's big?
There was one over 30 kilos in there, so 66 plus. With definitely a few fish over 20 kilos as well, and some backups. It wasn't a big lake; it had a big island down the centre of the lake. And it was the first place I'd actually seen other carp anglers, which is pretty good going. We were in mid-May, so prime time. And it was the first place. There were two local French blokes fishing around the back, and they could drive their car. And of course, I'd hired a van, and the van didn't fit through the archway. So I got the barrow out and barrowed it. And there's strictly no night fishing on the lake, and it's right next to the motorway. So there's a very good chance that the French told me that the police patrol the lake. I wasn't going to be taking any risks with it. So basically, it was one of those, I'm going to bait it and I'm going to come back tomorrow. You can't just expect to turn up, chuck some rods out, even if you find them. It was very hot. It was literally 32, 33 degrees. And you're slogging this barrow around. It is hard work. Yeah. So it was very much, I did put the rods out for the afternoon, but it was very much, let's prep it for tomorrow and let's give it a go tomorrow. And everyone in these lakes, particularly the French, will do one or two spoms, or they'll do 20 baits with the stick. That's kind of the usual.
Do you see the spom go out? Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of the norm, you know, just a little bit of bait over each rod. Let's see how we get on today. So you've got to try something different. You don't know whether it's going to work or not. But given I had the bait available to me, I put 4 kilos of 20 mil Scopex out in front of this island in a big area, covering sort of a 3-rod area, maximum throwing stick range, probably about 90, 100 yards, something like that. And chucked, you know, 4 helicopter rigs over the top with 20 mil Scopex wafters on the next morning, this was. And that I had 3 takes off that. I had a 30, an upper 30, and I lost one that went into a weed bed and a blooming hook pulled. But it was, I'm not gonna diss it because I might end up going back there. But the carp have been caught a lot. Okay, right. You could tell that from their mouths. You know, the corners have gone back. I'm not really going to France for that, if I'm honest. So I kind of felt I'm going to leave this to the locals. I only had one night left. So I did the day. I'd actually spent the night in a car park up the road, which wasn't a particularly nice experience, if I'm honest.
What happened in the car park?
No, nothing happened. Nothing happened in the car park, but I just put, basically the car park at this lake was right next to the motorway, and there were all sorts of characters coming in and out.
Yeah, I bet.
I didn't really want to be sleeping around there. So I went down the road, and because it was so hot, so many people were out and about until really late. I got down to this other car park at about 11 p.m, loads of kids. It was actually another lake with carp in it, but I got there so late, there was no realistic chance that I was going to be able to even look around. And I just put the bed chair out in the shade. There were headlamps in the car park, but I put it in the shade. I just kept my fingers crossed that no one was going to rape me. and literally have 4 or 5 hours sleep, set the alarm for silly o'clock in the morning, and then motored back to the other spot.
Brilliant.
And then after that, so basically that was my fourth spot of this session, and then on the way back up, I stopped in on the River Rhone on an absolutely magnificent spot, and I've got to hold my hat off to the guy that found it. I'm not the first person to have fished there. Another guy, I think he's from Holland, has done a couple of videos. It's the most magnificent spot, and it's chilled, and you've got magnificent scenery. And I stopped in on the night in there, and it's quite cool on the trailer here because I'm just saying, oh, isn't this a lovely space? I've just got the rods at blah, blah. And one of the rods just absolutely melts off behind me. And I'm running through the water and this rod is just absolutely one-toning. But it's catfish. And then another catfish and then another catfish. And I literally, the entire night was on catfish. I was even having them on tiger nuts. They do eat tigers now a lot. I had it on salago as well this year. They've almost become conditioned
to bait.
Yeah. And now they recognise it as part of their food source.
Well, you see it, don't you? You do see it. It's an easy food source, as you say, isn't it? Big creatures, they need a bit, and if it's there over time, they see it enough.
Yeah, I mean, what was interesting about Salago, we're going to come on to Salago because I've fished there again this year. But what was interesting was I was with the family. We were on the campsite for a week, and then we were away from the lake for the rest of the holiday, a long way away from the lake. So I was just getting very small opportunities to fish. And in that situation, the best thing to do is to put a load of bait in and hope that they come in on it while you're not there. And also try and pick areas where there are no other carp anglers. We were on the south side of the lake, Liançon area. The entire area was covered in anglers. It was very difficult. So I'm not going to go too much into it because we've got the other story to tell, but I kind of focused around the yacht clubs and the pleasure areas because I'm only dropping in for an early morning or a night.
Yeah, so no one's there.
Yeah. And the hardcore anglers, they will not. You're not allowed to night fish in there, and day fish as well. So I was dropping in late in the night. And a lot of people came up to me and said, you got to be off here by 7. It was no problem. I was off by 7 to do the croissant run on the way back for breakfast anyway. But I was able to put a load of bait in, particle, mainly tigers and maize, and fish Brazil nuts over the top. What was so fascinating was that the more bait you put in, and the more pungent and fermented the particle was, the more the cats liked it. Right. So I think small patches of fresh particle would have been the way to go. I caught a load of carp as well. Great trip, but just to try and get rid of the catfish, so to speak. I almost isolate the carp. I think that would probably be a better way to go. Yeah, but going back to the May trip, we haven't finished that yet, have we? So I went on the River Rhone. I had a load of cats, and then I basically just left 2 rods out on tigers, just baited with tigers, and I did have a lovely comment at first light.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so I'd caught on every place I'd been to. Yeah. That was the end of the trip. That was a long drive, bloody long drive back from there. So I caught from everywhere I'd been. I had only seen 2 anglers for the entire week, which in May is something pretty good. Yeah. They do, carp anglers do tend to follow the herd, and they will go to the circuit waters, where, to be fair, you can have it off. You can have big hits of big carp, but so it's nice sometimes to keep away from all of that and fish on your own terms, so to speak.
So all this content, that trip and subsequent, you filmed. And hopefully, in due course, they'll be on Nash TV.
Yeah. Some will be on Spogfrey, some will be on Nash, cool. and Henry or whoever within the team gets to decide that. So that was the spring. Then I went. Then I had the Jubilee weekend. Yes. This all sounds like a lot of nights, but it's literally 2 nights in April, 6 nights in May, 2 nights in June, and then I haven't been since, apart from the Salago trip, which was family
trip. So June was you 2?
June again, just 2 nights in northern France. And I just walked and walked and walked along these canals looking for these bloody carp. and I could not find them anywhere. And as is typically the case, I found them right in the town centre, in the harbour, in 8 foot of weed, just sitting in the weed, where it was unfishable from a boilie perspective. But the baguette shop was open up
Red
the
Bomb
road.
business.
Yeah. So I popped up to the local baguette shop. Was it half-hearted? Not sure. £20 bullet mono, straight through, size 2 twister, big lump of bread.
Yeah.
Lobbed it in. I say lobbed it. You cast it. If anyone's ever done any stalking, and we spend our entire lives when we were children stalking, carp fishing has changed so much in the last decade. But you cast it over the hedge. You very subtly drag it back over it. And some of the carp were interested, some didn't want to know. Basically, it turned out that on maybe the third or the fourth carp that I tried this on, took it, right, and it was a big carp. Okay, it was a real big canal carp, and I've hooked this carp in this weed. I've got my mate Tim's little blow-up boat. It's the same one that I've used. It's just been a godsend of a boat. I used it on Cassian. I've used it on various other places. But they've discontinued them for safety reasons. Okay, but fortunately Tim got this boat, and it must have God knows how many puncture holes repaired on it, but it's still the one for this sort of situation. So I'd hooked this cart, and it had just buried itself when I was in 8 foot of this hornwort weed. And so I blew this boat up with my mouth. My lungs were absolutely killing me.
Literally with your mouth, not like a little auto.
No. Blew it up with my mouth. It took about 10 minutes while I was just leaving the rod there with the rod tip knocking as this car
was. It just completely solid? It weren't moving through the weed at all. It was just solid.
It was impossible. When whether or not you overlay it on this or whether or not it was show it afterwards, I've got the most amazing footage of this. It was right to the surface, 8 foot. Excuse me, 8 foot plus. I'm starting to get a dry throat. Hang on a minute.
That's because you're pumping the boat up again in your head.
Yeah. And I took this fish. I went out in the boat, and it was hand lining. You couldn't actually play it with the scope. So the scope kind of went in the back of the boat, and I'm hand lining this through. And at this moment, this is a bit of a calamity, I've got to admit. But I hadn't put the arms into the scope landing net properly. Okay, schoolboy. It was schoolboy. I'm a new schoolboy to Nash. I hadn't put them in properly. That's all I can imagine had happened. I'm going to go to the dwarf landing nets now, by the way. and this landing, basically, the arms had come in all this rowing and commotion. The arms had come out of the spreader block, and the pole had just drifted into the weed. Outside. So I'm holding this. I'm holding this landing net like chopsticks.
Yeah,
trying to hold them out to try and hand line this fish over. And if anyone's ever tried to do that, and I've had a few occasions in the past where you haven't got the full net. Obviously, it droops right down at the other end. It's impossible. You need to get the head literally over your arms, which are being used as the spreader block, in order to net it. And I went through this routine again and again, and it was a very, very big fish.
What were we saying? What was very big?
I ended up catching it, by the way. It was 46 pounds. But it was the most magnificent jet black high canal carp that's been living in crystal clear water. It was a beautiful carp that probably, I don't know, it didn't have any hook marks in its mouth. I'm sure it had been caught before, but it was a magnificent beast. And I ended up basically all these. I've got my GoPro on, so I've got the whole lot filmed, and all these people are standing on these boats watching me. And I'm shouting at them, have you got a boat? Can you give me some help? Like this, because I was struggling. This boat was half deflated at this point. I'm in the middle of this weed. I did have a life jacket on. And I could not, I was reluctant to give the hook that much pressure to get the head to where I needed to get it over these. And I could not do it. And on the last occasion, the hook, which had gone through the lip, caught in the landing net.
Oh no!
so this fish, it was beaten. I was beaten, and then now that the barb is caught in the landing net. And so this fish is kind of waddling like this, and I'm like, it's a lost fish at this stage. It's a lost fish.
Gorgeous, yeah.
So I kind of lay down to water length level, tried to balance myself on the boat, and I actually beached it into the boat like this, and I just flopped it into the boat. I went it in, and everyone said, incroyable, like this. It was 46 pounds. It was the most wonderful carp. And for a two night weekend session,
result.
Starting to slouch a bit. For a 2-night session, it was an incredible result. And later on that afternoon, I had a lovely decent common as well.
On the bread,
yeah. And no one fishes that way for them. And I actually lost one at the net as well. That was probably an upper 30. Another jet black one.
They're big canal carp.
Oh, they were big ones. Real big canal carp. So yeah, amazing weekend. So I'd had 2 weekends, and I'd had the spring trip. And then in August, I had the family holiday to Salagu. And we've spoken about that. I'm starting to slouch here. And we've spoken about that a little bit. But short session fishing, trying to fit in amongst anglers. I had 5 carp in the end, and 2 real nice ones.
Nice.
And given the environment we were in and how difficult it was.
Yeah, it's not easy at the best of times, mate. If you're fishing it as in intently for the whole week, but you're not. You're doing family bits in the day.
Yeah, exactly. Throughout the holiday, I did 7 full sessions on. Well, I say full sessions, 7 sessions on there.
Yeah,
and also in between, which was a big advantage, I did get to bait a few times.
Yeah.
And that made a big difference. But yeah, I had them all on Brazil nuts. I mean, it's not. I've caught a lot of UK carp on Brazil nuts before. That wasn't the main reason I was using them. The real reason is that they're a big nut, and the bream are going to find that difficult to get in their mouth. I did still catch quite a few bream on them.
Did you?
But I ended up actually using 2 widthways on the hair, which offer up probably about a 25mm diameter, and the bream couldn't get them in their mouth. The cat's good.
Mad that the cats are eating nuts, mate. That is mad.
Isn't it? Nightmare. I had one real big one. His head was like this, but they're a nightmare. They're an absolute nightmare. But literally the south side of the lake, it was difficult to get in any of the main areas. Good session.
There's been a lot of publicity on it, hasn't there? In recent times.
Exactly, and that's been it. So. I took footage on all of those trips. I think I'm probably going to do one more weekend on a canal to combine those 3 into one movie.
Okay.
And then we'll have had the spring one and the Salagu one, and then I'm going to go this winter. We went on holiday to the Canaries this half term. So I missed out on my autumn trip, but I will do a winter when the weather's right and when it's okay with the wife and work to go. I will get a week in. Maybe it's still going to be just after Christmas, but just after Christmas is typically a busy time for the French. For the French, they have a tradition that they will go around Boxing Day. So we'll see what the weather does. We'll play it by ear, but one more session definitely. And the most exciting part of today is that Max is bringing in 20 kilos of bait for me.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see that.
Stock up, boy. Rinse it. There's some boats out there and all sorts, mate.
It's like a kiddie in a sweet shop when you get something.
Fill your boots. Get rid of that death trap of a boat that you've unceremoniously tipped a lovely carp in and get a proper one on the way out, mate.
Yeah.
But there's loads coming from you. I know there's loads in the pipeline. It sounds like you've been active in terms of when you have got out there. There have been busy trips, as always, and it's been enjoyable, which is good, mate.
Yeah.
I look forward to seeing them.
That's the most important part for anyone who goes carp fishing. Enjoy it. It's not all about catching the biggest carp. Just enjoy yourself. Otherwise, I'm guilty of it. I put loads of pressure on myself. That's just my nature.
And
I was watching the Nash Social, which I know you're going to be doing later, and I see Henry. he starts to get twitchy when he hasn't had. I'm like that for the entire trip until I start catching.
Yeah.
And that's a perfect example. So try and enjoy it. My mate Tim always says to me, John, don't put so much pressure on yourself, mate. He does it to himself. I know he does. But it's so difficult not to, particularly when you're trying to make a movie, you're trying to do the best. You're always trying to weigh up. Do you go for somewhere slightly easier? Or do you go for something you really want to do? And you've got to try and edge towards something you really want to do. If it's a massive failure, so be it. But if it goes well for you, then you're so pleased with yourself that you made that call.
Yeah. I like it. I'm looking forward to seeing them, mate. We're going to talk through sort of various different sort of things around you, because I think a lot of people have seen your content, but I think it'd be nice to get an insight into you, where that's all come from, your sort of journey. And what I wanted to start with was probably an aspect that not a lot, I certainly didn't know before speaking to you, but your UK fishing, because it hasn't always been European adventure style stuff, although you have been on that from the very beginning. But there's obviously a core of you with your sort of beginnings and fishing within the UK where you sort of developed. So talk me through that process of you sort of, if you like, getting the carp fishing bug and how that developed into sort of the UK scene and what that looked like for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as my old mate Tony Parker would say, everyone has to do their apprenticeship. You can't just go straight to fishing major European lakes and rivers without doing your apprenticeship. And whether that's 2 years, whether that's 20 years, whether that's 30 years, everyone has to do that. I mean, for me, it's the story you've heard so many times. I picked up my first rod, or was given my first rod when I was 3 years old, and it was a cane. Believe it or not, that was actually in France. But that was catching roach, gudgeon, barbel, perch, not even barbel actually, perch, little, I think they call them pumpkin seed perch or rainbow perch in France.
I know what you mean.
Which is the tiny little wrasse-looking fish, beautiful little colour.
They're cool.
Things. They're cool little things. Yeah. And they come in the springtime. I think they actually die and lay their eggs and die in the winter. I'm pretty sure of that. And then the new ones will develop. But we would, we would go to France. Asticot is what you call maggots in French. You go and buy your asticot from the tackle shop, and we would go and do that from such an early age.
It's your family trips, yeah.
This is summer family trips. Yeah. And then probably when we were 6 or 7, I grew up close to Crowborough, which is in East Sussex, which is on the Kent border. We joined the local angling club, Crowborough Angling Club. Probably had 15 venues, small lakes that had some carp in, but you would be going for everything. And from that very early age, every weekend, again, there was a close season back then, so you would do the 16th of June, probably through until late August, maybe September time. My dad would be taking me and my brother every weekend without fail for an early morning and or an evening session. And through that, there's always a group of the youngsters that do it in any town or village. Certainly back then, I mean, we're talking late 80s.
Okay.
So long time ago. Yeah. And it was an outdoor way of life for everyone back then. Yeah. No one had phones or anything like that. So you spent your time outdoors. And there was a small group of us that developed. We all joined went to the same lakes, and we all got to know each other. Some of us went to school together. There was me and my brother Ben. There was my mate Tim, who still fishes quite extensively, both in UK and in France. He was in some of my earlier videos. Okay. And his older brother Simon, and then there's Jimmy Coleman and his brother. I think his name's Lee. And Jim is a big, he's a big name down in the southeast. He's caught carp from bloody everywhere. And all of us kind of developed. We learnt off each other, and almost from the age of maybe 7 through to maybe 13. We were all going to the same lakes, learning off each other, all catching the same fish as you do on these small places. And I would say probably by the age of 13 or 14, it's a natural progression on anything you look at. You talk with bait, you go from maggots to sweet corn to luncheon meat to dog biscuits, and then to ready steadies, and then to rolling your own bait. And then possibly even we got to the point where we even started buying out ingredients, mixing the ingredients, and then rolling our own bait.
Right.
But we went through all of it, and of course the lakes get bigger, the carp get bigger, and you do go through a natural progression up to the point where I think I was 14. Graham in the tackle shop said, "Look, you're in here all the time. Do you want to come and work for me on a Saturday?" So I jumped at the chance. 14-year-old.
It's the dream, innit?
You know, 20 quid out the till at the end of the day.
Yeah.
I would be stacking the shelves with ground bait, trying to help people, you know, decide on hooks, baits, you know, and we knew every base mix, we knew every ingredient. You know, back in those days, it was, from a Nash perspective, it was always Amber Tractor, Sting or Monster Pursuit. There was Solar, Dairy Cream, Squid and Octopus, Koi Rearer.
Yes.
Amazing baits.
Yeah, they. I remember using that.
It was Ready Steadies, Tutus, Tropicana, etc. And then there was Dave Thorpe's, which was a really good bait. The Puckerfish mix and the Red Crave, they were amazing. But you know, we went through all of them, and we learned so much about all of it. Who was on what, who was on where, all sorts of secret squirrel situations going on, and it was such a great way to learn.
Yeah.
A great way to learn your apprenticeship, so to speak. And by that point, probably by the age of 15, I think my biggest was about £30, just over 30.
A decent fish.
Yeah, it was. I had that, believe it or not, I had that fish 4 times from between 26 and 30. You know, because you were all so local, you would fish all of your local lakes, and we did suffer a few repeats. And these days, I hate the concept of repeating carp, but back then, that was just how it was.
Yeah, exactly.
And then from there, so that was really up until the age of sort of 14, 15. As I went into the late teenage, I must admit, I did fall away to an extent. I wasn't quite so obsessive. You're starting to go to the pub. Yeah. Starting to meet girls. You're starting to, you know, back in those days, you could go to the pub at 16. And also starting to, I was doing my GCSEs and A-levels. My mum and dad were very hot on doing, they promoted a good education, so to speak. So
You're quite academic? I can imagine you were,
yeah, I was pretty academic. Got my GCSEs, got my A-levels, and went off to Nottingham. For university.
Nottingham. Yeah. Unbelievable.
Yeah. There's 2 unis in Nottingham. There's Trent and there's uni.
Yeah.
I was
at uni.
You
ain't a Trent man at all, are you? Partially well spoken.
Oh, of course, yes. So
I told you Nottingham's a poor man's Leicester, didn't I? I told you that before. You loved it though. You said you good years.
It was a brilliant 3 years of my life. My goodness. I mean, to be fair, fishing took a bit of a back seat.
I bet it did.
I had the big one out of Barden, which was the local lake in Tunbridge that has gone on to produce loads of incredible carp since. But I virtually fluked the big one out of there. I didn't do much time on there. The big one was called Arthur, and he was a magnificent half linear. Yeah, beautiful fish. I think he topped out at maybe 36, 37 pounds. But Barden was a lovely 14-acre pit. Much bigger than what we were used to. So to catch a carp from a bigger place was quite a big deal. So it was one of those, saw a fish roll by the island, slung a pop-up out to it.
What rig, what were you on? What was your pop-up go-to?
So
at this time?
This would have been, it was actually a corkboard Dave Thorpe Puckerfish mix with Juicy Peach. With size 6 Fox Series 2 hook, which is similar to what you might call a quarter wide gape or a claw sort of thing. Size 6, popped up 3 inches off the bottom, 3 bait stringer, job done.
That is proper carpy, isn't it? Old school.
Probably 2 ounce semi-fixed in line. I can't remember exactly. And yeah, 2 or 3 hours later, the take came. And I had the biggest fish in the lake. It was very lucky.
What a buzz, mate, that would be, wouldn't it?
It was amazing.
It's always that, as you said there, when you go to that bigger water, after fishing sort of little ones, and you have a result, it's like, I've done this, mate. You know,
that's right. That's right. I mean, we have missed out. I've got to just tell you the part about first going to Salagu, because the video's called Returning 28 Years Later.
Yeah.
So when I was 14, I went to Salagoo. My mum and dad had gone to the region just for a holiday, and they said, "Do you want to come along?" And they said Montpellier, and I watched the Andy Little video. Andy Little did a video on Salagoo back in the night, must have been the real early 90s. And even a swim is named after him on the Lake Andy Little Point from that video, because he was the first person to publicise it.
Yeah.
But you know, as a child who's used to estate lake fishing, just to see the enormity and the surroundings of such a barren, rocky, red rock, just raw, I suppose that's a good word to use for it, raw fishing, and to actually sample that at 14 years old was just something absolutely incredible. I do actually talk a lot about this on the trip, so I'm not going to go into loads of detail on it on this. But to actually return there 28 years later and to have that trip, I didn't catch anything on that trip, but I lost one. I lost one, but I saw one of the tiny little bait runner spools turning at a rate that I'd never seen a bait runner turn before. And it was like opening a door to a new world. Okay. And the adrenaline rush that gave me, I swear to God, I've never ever had anything since. The only ever lakes that people ever talked about was Cassian, the Orient, Salagoo, Shanty, maybe Medine was coming onto the scene, and maybe the River Lot. Obviously people going to all these places, but they were the only ones that were really spoken about. So to be able to go on there and actually fish and actually get a run, you know, I was dropped off. My parents dropped me off at 10 in the morning. They picked me up at 4 in the afternoon every day. So I was fishing the worst hours of the day.
Yeah.
But I was there, you know, no mobile phone, just the ants to
Can you
play
imagine
with.
doing that now? Taking your kid and just going, "I'll tell you what, mate, here's Cassian, have a good one." Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well,
it does a few.
The year later, my mum and dad actually dropped me off for 3 nights. So I was 15 years old, no mobile phone, nothing. My dad went round the lake asking, there were no other carp anglers, there's no one carp fishing, but it was a lake with, it had a volleyball court on it, and it had a little bar where people were getting drinks. Midsummer in France, beautiful place. There was a big lake and a small lake. And my dad spoke fluent French, so he was asking them,
did he?
Are you allowed to night fish on these places? And of course, everyone said, "Je ne comprends pas, no idea, I don't understand, blah blah blah." And he said, "I think you'll be all right here, son."
I've got 3 nights with your mum. It's all right. You can stay here.
Yeah, and
That's
I was
quality
like,
from your dad.
brilliant. And this is a great story. I've got to tell this story because I took with me 5 kilos of ready steadies. They were a bergamot boiler. I'm not going to say the name. They were ready steadies, though, the semolina base mix. And I took 1 kilo. This would have been 95. 1 kilo of Nash squid livers. Okay, great story. This great promotion, and and basically chucked the marker out. You know, had my marker rod. I was all mad keen for it. Not very far. You didn't have throwing sticks back then. You just had Black Widow catapult. Yeah.
Is that the Black Widow with the wrist support?
Yeah,
I
wrist
remember
support.
those bad boys.
But you can only fire 1 boil at a time.
Oh yeah, don't do more than.
And I'm there for hours, pumping out these. Fortunately, the elastic didn't go on me. I'm pumping out these. I think they were probably 18 mils. You either got 14 or 18 in those days. Pumping out these ready steadies. First night went by. I think I had some sweet corn as well, and I had about a £2 common in the margin on the sweet corn on the first night. But it was actually quite enjoyable because I was catching crucians and roach and stuff on the pasty rod during the day, but the actual carp rods didn't have anything. The second night, I'm obviously 15 years old. The place is in the middle of a wood. It goes dead silent at night, and all you can hear are the deer and the badgers or whatever. And you 14, 15, you're a little bit shifty at this sort of thing.
Yeah, 100%.
And all of a sudden, some headlights started coming down the road. Now there was an article in a Cart World around this time about this story on the River Lot where they talked about crocodiles coming down the river, which were huge, great tree trunks that were coming down in the flood water. And these guys, they said it was pouring all night long. This is a famous Carp World story. I'm sure it was bullshit, but I didn't know that, and I'm sure from memory this was coming to mind. And basically, in this story in Carp World, two blokes pulled up opposite in a van. One pointed at the other, put a gun to his head, shot him, and chucked him in the river.
What?
This is a story that was written in Carp World.
What?
And the guy says, I can't remember who wrote the article. He looks basically, this bloke looked across. It was pitch black, so he couldn't see the other bank. He just looked across, and he swore he was staring right at him. And literally, he ran down the bank to his mate, picked up his mate, and said, "We've got to get out of here." And they said they reported to the police. I don't know if the story's true or not, but it was in Carp World. So this is going through my mind.
Of course it is.
As these lights come down the road, and a bunch of motorbikes came down the bank. Okay, and the road dissected the two lakes, and I was just thinking, please go straight. Please go straight forward. And at this moment, my rod that's been out for 48 hours roars into life.
No.
I'm like, oh my God, what do I do? What do I do? Do I carry the bivvy? Do I pick the rod up? So I've hit into this fish. And it's clearly a big carp. Okay, for me, it's something possibly a PB. It's a big fish. You're in France. You're in the surroundings that you've dreamed of all this time. But there are bloody motorbikes, and they've hit a left down towards me. Oh my God! These motorbikes came past, and I'm actually literally about to piss myself. These people
right behind you,
right behind me. They stop. And then they carry on. And they all carry on. They go around the other side of the lake, and they have a fire, and they have a piss up, and they get the music on. They're just kids. I was actually half tempted to go and join them, but it was all right in the end.
Yeah.
And I had this fish on, and it was a 23. It was a lovely 23. I didn't have anyone to photo it. I wasn't going to go around, and so I never got a photo of it. I just put it back.
Result though,
amazing result. It was a magnificent, undoubtedly uncaught carp of 23 pounds, and it was my second biggest or third biggest carp I'd ever caught. It was the strongest fart I'd ever had. It was an amazing fish. I can always remember it. Size 6, long shank, Fox Series 1, which is which is quite similar to the Nash
twister, isn't it?
Long shank twister, probably now. And snake skin and snake bite were coming in. They were coming in, so I had it on that. But then on the final night, basically, I decided to put this kilo squid livers out in between the two rods. Okay, on the last night, and then I put my pasty rod in between the two, bang over the top. I had 2 takes that last night, both on the squid livers, and I've got absolutely no doubt. It was the quality of the bait that separated those 2 fish from the other 2 rods.
What were they? Good.
They were on the. Yeah, they were 18 and 20.
That's a quality.
For a 15-year-old,
you buzzing your head up.
Oh, it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. I got a few photos on the mat of these, but I never got actually holding them. But it was amazing, absolutely amazing result.
I love the fact your dad's just dropped you off for 3 nights.
Oh my God! To be fair, they came back after 2 to check I was okay. And I said, I'll stay for 1 more.
I'll stay for a week.
Yeah. Is he still here? Yeah, I've got to go and pick him up again. Yeah.
What a trip, man.
Amazing. So I had it in my blood from such an early age that I just wasn't so traumatized well, that's probably not the quite word. I wasn't so apprehensive about driving on my own, doing any of this stuff, because I'd just been exposed to it from such an early age.
You said there you went to uni, you obviously did all that, so fishing took a bit of a back. Not that there's a great deal of fishing around the Midlands anyway, but took a bit of a backseat. What was the reintroduction like from that point? I'm guessing you finish uni, you go into sort of work, but are you based back down Kent way?
Yeah,
or did you stay?
So basically, while I was in Nottingham, I didn't fish apart from the opening. I did the opening 16th of June, both years in a row. Typically by June, the exams are finished for everyone.
Yeah.
But you normally kick about for several weeks of partying before you go back, try and earn some money, try and pay off some student loan or whatever. I did the opening 2 years in a row where again, I had the advantage. I wasn't really working. So I would go up for a week in advance. I'd bait up some beautiful margin spots. As you know, the River Trent's a very fast flowing
Oh,
river.
so you're on the Trent?
On the Trent, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I bait up the River Trent in a number of spots and go on the opening and fish it. And I was baiting with pellet and hemp. And then fishing a few boilies over the top, and then come the opening, they were just waiting for me, and you could have the best of it in those 2 or 3 nights before. What happened both years, quite coincidentally, was the rain came in, the water rose about a foot, and the carp moved on. But I had some really good fish. Nothing. I think the biggest I had was about 18. But they were beautiful, and they were virgin carp.
Yeah, totally.
Undoubtedly back in the 90s. They were beautiful commons and mirrors, hard fighting. I actually saw, because I was baiting in the evening, I never really saw, I saw the odd swirl, which was mainly the chub and the barbel, which I caught a lot of as well. But on the 15th, I went down early because I wanted that swim, and it was day ticket sections.
Okay.
So I knew there were going to be a few other people doing the opening. None of them had done any background work. They'd just turn up and fish. So I wanted to make sure I get down there. I got down there on the 15th, and these carp were troughing early morning on my bait. I could see them all. There was a magnificent, fully scaled that was probably 16, 17. He wasn't the biggest. And I was so tempted to put him
Yeah, cool.
but I didn't. I held off for the day. But great bit of fishing. You know, I didn't do it for long, but I did the opening. And then after that was uni done, I did do a year travelling after that. I did the usual backpacker route.
What, Southeast Asia way? Or
So,
not? Australia?
Yeah, so what did I do? Let's just remind ourselves. I went Cook Islands 2 weeks.
Oh, my. Wow.
Fiji for 2 weeks. No, that's wrong. I went America. I went Boston, San Francisco, Cook Islands, Fiji. From Fiji, we went to New Zealand.
Yeah.
Great trout fishing in New Zealand.
Unbelievable trout fishing in New Zealand.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Caught some incredible trout.
Did you go North Island or South Island?
Both. We bought a car. We bought a car in a backpacker resort. I was really into my pool back then. I was playing in a pool tournament.
Wow.
I was playing in a pool tournament, and believe it or not, I actually won that tournament. But
Good, man.
Yeah. And we met a couple that were trying to sell their car. Okay, but it didn't have what they call the WOF, which is the warrant of fitness. So in this country, you call it an MOT.
Yeah.
In New Zealand, they call it the WOF. So we literally bought this car for $200. Got the warrant of fitness done for $60, and then we drove around both islands. For a couple
that's mega
amazing. Me and a mate, we picked up a couple of other people, a girl and a boy, while we were out there. Amazing. So we did both islands. Got back to the same backpacker joint in Auckland and sold it. Sold it for 150. Made a $50 loss. Who cares?
That's a result.
Yeah. And then and believe it or not, in New Zealand, I met a guy who was working out there, and I bought a rod off him.
What, fly fishing rod?
No, a sea rod. I bought a beach casting rod with
animal.
big like it's like a big pit reel, to be honest. And it's so funny. We went off to Australia then, and we did a full circuit of Australia. And all of you go on the Greyhound bus or the Oz Experience bus.
Oz Experience.
Yeah, we went on the Greyhound. All of the surfers, they come off the bus with their surfboards. I came off with my rod.
Did you actually do some?
Loads of fishing off the rocks. Brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant fishing out there. You get all the pelagic species just off the rocks there. So you went to the local tackle shop, picked up a bunch of garfish and a bunch of huge hooks.
Yeah, animal
hooks.
Yeah.
And I caught some great trevally. They call them tail. Another fish called a tailor, Jack Crevalles. I actually hooked. I think they call them kingfish over there, but I think they're called amberjacks.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
You see them popping for them on YouTube.
That's a rook, mate.
I lost it. Oh yeah, hook came out quite quickly after I'd hooked it. But you know, great experience. And then from Australia, we went up to Indonesia, went to Lombok, Gili Islands,
wicked.
Bali, and then up through Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Thailand.
Yeah.
Did a couple of full moon parties, all the stuff that we all did, everyone would do back then.
Yeah.
And so I came back a year later, and at this point I would have been 22. So I was 22 years old. I was back in the UK, majorly in debt. You know, student loans coming up to your eyeballs. So I needed to get jobs, and all my uni mates, they got jobs in central London. They'd done work placements in central London at the consultancies. We'd all got really good degrees from arguably one of the top 10 unis in the country.
What was your degree, mate?
It was civil engineering.
Right, yeah. Okay.
Very maths focused it is, and but I hadn't done any of these placements. I'd been using my summers, been working in factories and stuff like this.
Yeah.
So I didn't have that
network.
Exactly. I applied for a number of these big consultancies, and I got through quite a few interview stages, but there's several stages with loads of competition, and I didn't actually get any of them. So I ended up getting a job as a graduate engineer on the Mid-Kent Business Park in Snodland, which is basically right next to, it's in the Medway Valley, and it's
Carpy
in Carpland. We used to call it Carpland, but I didn't know about that at the time. Of course you did. No, I didn't.
Did you not?
I did not.
That was an intentional decision.
No, it wasn't. I had that in mind, but I didn't know about all the lakes. I knew about the Johnston's Railway was close to there.
Yeah.
I didn't know about all the others, because that was always in carp talk that was around at that time.
Of course. Carp talk was the vine, wasn't it, mate?
Yeah. So I was driving to work, and there was this lake on my right hand side, and it looked like a big lake. It looked good, and I was back in the UK. I was living at home, and Snodland. It was probably about an hour's drive for me. I was driving past this lake right next to Snodland, so I thought I'm going to just pop out at lunchtime, have a walk around, see what it's all about. There's no security back then. Now you can't get close to the lake. You can't get close to any of them because they've got security, and rightly so, because there's all sorts going on. But back then you could just stroll in. So I strolled in with my suit, and there was some bloke fishing, a carp angler, a beautiful lake, 12, 14 acres. It was called Alders back then. It's now called the Medway. I think it's on the Medway Valley ticket, called the Big Lake. But it was called Alders Big Lake back then. It had a small one called the Trout Lake next to it, and it was full of weed. And what all the anglers that I saw, this guy caught a £20 common, and to me, I caught carp up to over 30s before, but the average stamp in this lake was good.
Right.
Okay. It was definitely mid-20s, if not better, with the chance of a 30. And it was right next to my work. I'd have been stupid not to get a ticket. And this guy caught a £20. So straight away I called my mate Darren, who, believe it or not, I'd met on the Ballast Pit years earlier. And Darren lived really close to here. And I called him out and I said, look, there's this lake. Do you want to join with me? He said, yeah, let's join. And everyone was fishing the towpath out to this weed. And the back of the lake was solid. It looked like it was solid with weed, but really it was patches of Canadian underwater with a horrible blanket weed over the top, where the oxygen comes up and makes bubbles in the blanket weed. It had that everywhere. Where were the carp going to be living? They're certainly not going to be flipping on the towpath where everyone's fishing. So I took a walk round the back, and there were some lovely spots right in the edge that I could bait. No one was fishing around there. And we were using a Darrenth Valley bait at the time. There was a Darrenth Valley bait called skunk oil or skunk and geranium essential oil, which was basically a fish meal that had been hardened quite well, and it had some essential oils in it. And I put a load in these margin spots, loads, probably 3 or 4 kilos. For back then was an awful lot of bait. Everyone was fishing the towpath out to the weed, and all the carp, you could see them hump coming up in the weed. And went home, and I came back early in the morning for a look, and the carp were just ripping the bottom, absolutely ripping the bottom to shreds. So I did my day at work, anxiously, drove back, picked up my stuff, got down there for an early morning. And that early morning, I had 2 fish. I had a 26 and a 29.
Oof.
Real nice carp. And the 29, it was a fish they called bullet hole, and it was one of the A team. It was one of the smaller of the A team. And I called up Darren. I said, Darren, I've had these 2 fish. There were several anglers fishing on the tow bar. I said, don't want to tell anyone.
Yeah.
Can you come and do the photos? And Darren was a milkman at the time. And he said, I'd love to, mate, but I'm right in the middle of my milk run. I can be there in about 2 hours, stick them in the sack. And I said, I would, but I've got to be at work. And he said, I tell you what, I'll get my wife to come down and do the photos. What? I can't believe the milkman's wife coming down to do the photos. And I said, are you sure, mate? Are you sure? He said, yeah. I'll call up Lita. She'll come down and do them now. And I was like, you really don't have to. You know, I'm sure I will have to go and ask her. No, we're going to keep it secret. So he got his wife down. Oh, bless her. She came down. She's a lovely lady. Came down and did these photos. And we kept it quiet. And as we're catching more carp, we were gradually breaking up this blanket weed, and the carp were almost moving more and more into the weed, into the back. But over the course of that sort of 2 or 3 week period of keeping it quiet, I had the biggest one and I had the second biggest one twice. There were to be fair, there was another big common in there around similar size, and they all got a lot bigger, a lot quicker, a year or 2 after that. And but I'd had the 2 well-known fish in the lake, and I repeated one of them. And whilst there were there were plenty of other fish to catch. They were mainly 20s, and I'd had the best out of it. And
exactly.
That's the way I've always fished. If you had the best out of it, why are you then going to drop back to almost a steady state of catching when you can move on to somewhere else and potentially have it off again? So after that, Darren knew a guy called Ronan, and Ronan was a very dedicated, very well-known angler in the Medway Valley. And he even had a fish named after him on the Johnson's Railway Pit, Ronan's fish, which was a lovely mirror in the low to mid 30 range. But I didn't know Ronan very well, but I've met him very briefly on Keston Ponds, which was in Bromley. It was a very well-known free place, and it had a fish called the Pettin and a couple of others. I'd fished there a few times. I didn't have the big one out of there. I'd had a fish called the Top Pond Mirror, which was a lovely 20. But I knew him a little bit from there, and me and Darren went down and we met him on the railway lake, and straight away we were like, we're going to join. This is it. And of course, in those days, there's no waiting.
No, straight in.
You're straight in.
Yeah.
60, maybe 60, 70 quid for the year. Absolute bargain. It was wonderful. And of course, I was working next door, so I had this massive advantage of being able to pop down at lunchtime. And to be fair, I asked a lot of questions. They used to call me Toff. And I go down there. Stupid.
Why? Because you came in your suit or something?
Yeah,
what?
exactly. And because of how I spoke, they used to think I spoke really posh down there. They're proper Medway boys. And
what does that mean? What proper Medway boys? Proper Ken.
And they didn't. To be honest, I probably pushed it a little bit hard. It was almost. I probably think of it as quite similar to the Yateley complex, where you don't go onto the car park until you fish the other lakes. You do your apprenticeship on the complex, so to speak. And I was, and I'd gone on straight away thinking I'm going to go onto the railway lake. That's the one I want to fish. That's the one with the biggest fish. It had a lovely big leather in it. It had the wood grain. It had a bunch of incredible upper 30s.
Straight to the car park.
That's me. That's me done. Oh no. There was no bailiffing on there. The boys bailiffed it themselves.
Oh, he's one of them.
And they didn't like me. I know in those you had to earn your points, and I obviously hadn't even started fishing at this point. I was just asking questions, trying to be nice, But this boy coming down in a suit who's 22, 23, he can F off.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I got that feeling down there. I might have read it a little bit wrong. Don't know. But I thought, actually, I think I'm going to drop back onto Larkfield. Said to Darren, I think we should fish Larkfield to start with. And let's fish it. And on the first weekend down there, got down there. It was in March, and I'd already found where the fish lived. If there was any sunshine on Larkfield, which was also quite a well-known, quite a difficult, considered a reasonably difficult lake, they would all come into the reed beds in the sunshine in the springtime, and they would sit in the reed beds and they would soak up the sun, as most fish do at that time of year. So I was hell-bent on fishing these reeds, and it was either late March or early April, I can't remember, and I finished my work at 5 o'clock, so I'd normally get down there about 5:30, and there were buckets in all the swims. And buckets in all the swims. I said, what's going on here then? Oh, yeah, so-and-so's coming down. He might be down tonight, he might be down in the morning, but he's fishing there. So-and-so's fishing there, so-and-so's fishing there. Sorry, mate, that's how it is down there. And I was just like, this is unbelievable. And I'd met... John McAllister was on the railway. He was a really nice guy. Yeah. And I'd spoken with him. He hadn't given me any shit. Terry Dempsey was down there with Tony Moore. They were nice guys. Nice lads. They were nice blokes. Remember, this is a long, long time ago, so they were much younger. There were a couple on there. Once you knew them, they were lovely.
Yeah, but before,
we don't know you, so we, and fair dues. That's how it was back then. And so anyway, I ended up squeezing in on this bloody corner of these reeds. I had to fish them. I squeezed in a corner, and that first weekend there were loads of tension there, which was another eye opener. Fishing stiff-link pop-ups off this weed, off this reed. There were loads of good quality tension there, but we weren't there for that. They went from probably £5 to £9. Most of them. Most of them were 6 or 7.
Yeah, that's a
real
great
good
average,
tension.
yeah.
But on the second day of this weekend, I had a good take, and it pulled me into the reeds, and I gave it a load of stick, and the whole reed bed came back towards me with a lovely they were the most magnificent linear carp. They were these mid-20 to 30 pound, absolutely beautiful carp, and they didn't come out that regularly either. They were very scaly carp, and I've got to say they were probably some of the nicest UK carp caught I've ever caught.
Really?
Yeah, they were beautiful fish. And to cut a long story short, Brazils did really well on there. Brazil nuts. They were real, and tigers did well. And you could either have them. The best way to catch them was either to fish a single hookbait, a single half a Brazil nut, or to go mega heavy on the particle and get them feeding in a spot. But I had most of mine on singles, which is an unusual way of...
That is unusual.
Yeah. But I had 12 fish on that springtime. No, I didn't. I had probably 8 or 9 that spring, and maybe 3 or 4 the following spring, but I was doing other stuff at the time. But that was really that was almost the stepping stone to proper French fishing, because I met a chap called Andy Pickering on there, and Andy was, I was, by the way, I've moved out of home at this point. I was living in Blackheath, renting a house in a house share. And Andy was living in East Dulwich, which was just up the road from me, 20 minutes drive away. And we were quite active on the Cemex forum and the other carp forum at the time.
Forums,
yeah. We were quite active, and we got talking, and Andy said, look, I'm going to pop around and see you for a cup of tea. He was also fishing the railway at the time, and he was catching really well out of there. He caught all of them out of there in the end. But he was up for the French thing, and I was bang up for it. Because I'd had those early years doing it, I was really wanting to go back out there and do that. And that was really, at that point in I knew how easy it could be and how big the carp were and how just different it was. It was like unlocking a door to a new world, and I wanted to get back out there. And Andy was desperate to go out as well. So he came around and had a cup of tea with me. That's where it all started, really. He said, let's go to Shantycock. We'll book a swim. We'll do it. And there were loads of articles being written at that point. We were planning on going in the autumn time, where the water level would be low and everyone would be fishing to the channels in the deeper water. We all had it planned out.
What age are you at this point?
I would have been 23. Like 23, 24.
Early to mid-20s, yeah.
I think I was 23 at that point. So money was still tight. I'd actually, I was still at Mid-Kent Water at that point, yeah. money was tight, but this was what we wanted to do. We were gonna push the boat out. You know, I didn't even have a boat at this point, so I went and bought one of these decathlon type boats. I didn't have a motor, I didn't have an Echo,
just a rowboat.
Just a rowing boat. In fact, I want to give you a photo of we called it the Speed Hawk. I've got a photo of it with the Jiffamount Church in the background. You know, it's a beautiful shot. And Andy had a boat as well, but he had an Echo, he had all the kit. And he said, so we booked this swim. And again, there was no websites for this. He had printed off this map of the lake. It wasn't a Google Maps or anything like that. It was a handwritten sketch of the lake with all the swims on it. And there were a couple of pencil lines, one at the north end, one at the south end. And because we were late to the party, we got this swim on the south part, behind this line. And I immediately assumed this line was a bridge. Okay, and we were just in the south corner of the lake. We didn't know at the time, but it transpired that we had actually booked a swim on the South Lake, the South Basin it's called, which is a different lake altogether. So we'd read all these articles.
And you're not fishing.
And we're fishing the South Basin, which
which
doesn't fluctuate in water. But you have to learn. And Andy said, "Look, let's go and check it out. We're all so excited. Let's go for a recce in the summer. We'll do a summer weekend over there. Blah blah. Check it all out. Understand where we're going, how we're going to fish it. Blah blah blah." And I said, "It's going to be tight on money. If we're going to go for a recce, I'm going to bring my rods." And he said, "Yeah, great idea. Let's all bring our rods. We'll bait heavily. We'll come back in the morning. It'll be brilliant." And I was like, "Come on, we're going to do it. So anyway, got the Michelin A to Z out. We booked up the campsite. All I can remember was getting eaten alive by mozzies midsummer on this campsite. It was fucking horrible. It was absolutely awful. It was dead hot. And anyway, we saw our swim that we were fishing. We were like, "Oh, sod it. We're in this lake now. We booked it. We're
committed,
But anyway, enough of that. That's going to happen in September. Let's get our rods out." So we went and baited. We couldn't find any access. This is such a funny story. We couldn't find any access. So we thought we'll use this boat ramp. It was late in the evening. Everyone had gone back who had been fishing that day. We found this boat ramp. We could get the car close to the water. We'll put some H blocks out, big H blocks. We'll leave them for the night. We'll bait the granite out of them, and we'll come back in the morning. And we got up ever so excited. We rode all these baits out. We dropped them off. And Andy had his big pod up on this boat. I had my rods just to the side. 8 lines spanning the whole area. What could go wrong?
Yeah, we're on it.
We're on it. Anyway, Andy's car was a little bit temperamental. Its central locking system was broken, and it would go on and it would go off. We got all our rods out. We got our bed chairs and sleeping bags out. We went back to grab a bottle of water or something, and we couldn't get back into the car.
Oh, no.
Oh, my God. And he said, "Don't worry, it's no big deal. It does this sometimes. It'll open in a couple of hours." So, okay, whatever. Went and lay down. Just as it started getting light, all of a sudden, a load of French cars started coming down the boat ramp with their pipe boats, all reversing up. And Andy's car was covering this. Sunday morning, prime time pipe.
Full of them.
7 cars, all getting the arse. And Andy was trying to explain to him. It was one of those moments where you just take the sleeping bag over your head. I don't want to be here right now. This is so embarrassing. It was so embarrassing. And literally, we had to just tell them to go away. There was no possible way of them getting to the water with his...
Did he not try again to get in his car? Just not
He couldn't. It was just totally broken. It was a night. But this is how you learn, right? You learn the hard way. You don't just get someone telling you that you don't go near the boat ramps on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And of course, all these anglers went round to their boat ramp, probably half an hour's drive away. They all come into the water. They missed their first half hour of dawn. They all came straight over. They wiped out all our lines, probably deliberately, and that was game over for the recce. But we learned so much just from
what did
everything
you learn?
Everything went
like
wrong.
Logistically,
just logistically, where we were going to be fishing, how to drop a bait by the boat, how we got into the routine. One would hold the rod, one would take it out, tight up all the slacken the bait and drop it. Just feel it down for a nod. All this stuff we got sort of a cycle going.
Yeah.
Exactly how we were going to do it when come our proper trip in September. So yeah, that was. I mean, we can go into. I could go through every trip at this stage. I don't know how much detail you want to go into.
I think it's interesting. At that time, when you decided that France was the sort of place to go and to go out there, I know you had the really positive early experiences, which obviously whetted your appetite, so to speak. But for you, influence-wise, at the time in your angling, what were the influences, and were there influences of the likes of people going over, like Lockie, etc., going over and sort of pioneering Cassian and that? Were they all factored into that, or was it much of sort of within yourself as much as it was external people?
No. To be fair, by that point, I mean, from a UK perspective, in '98 when Dave Lane's book came out,
yes,
oh my God, obsession with carp. That inspired me so much, and he didn't do it in France. But no. Those early days on Raisbury, after he'd done Harefield, after he'd done Longfield, etc., when he went on to Raisbury, that was pretty inspiring stuff. But I mean, Kevin Maddox had written Carp Fever. We had a copy of Carp Fever. I had a copy of Andy Little's book, My Passion for Carp.
You said Andy Little, yes, of course you did.
So Kevin Maddox and Andy Little, we were in contact with Globetrotter, Tony Davis Patrick back then quite a bit. Again, only online. And in those very early years, they were pretty big inspirations. You know, to be honest, I've read loads of other articles with loads of other anglers, but those ones come to mind. That you know, it was a different world they spoke about in those early carp world days, and in those early books that they wrote. So I'd probably say in Carp Fever, there's a chapter on, I think it's called the 13-hour fight, where they're on Cassian, they hook into what's clearly a catfish. They're only fishing with light tackle. But when you're a 15-year-old and you're reading that,
it's Moby Dick, isn't it?
It is like, oh my good God. Imagine being in that situation. Imagine having to worry about the police coming down and cutting your line. Imagine you literally having this fish snagged up, having to go back, recover because you're so sunburnt, then go back out and continue the fight and actually get it out the snag. It was just, it was a world that I just had to, it was a bit of me, really. I had to be all over that as I got older. And I would say those were probably my early inspirations. But you always have to start somewhere. And we'd started on Shanty. But
what a start.
Oh, it was amazing. We actually enjoyed ourselves on that September trip. We had carp to about £40. We had loads of them as well. And it was a brilliant trip. We won't go into all the details of that because it would be so lengthy. But after that was it. Like I said, all the four places that people ever spoke about was Salagu, Cassian, Medine maybe, and the Orient, and maybe the Lot. And there was so much more to France. And I've got to mention it, but the year later, I was active on the forums, and there was some chap who called himself the Searcher. He seemed to know a thing or two. So I thought, and it was Nick Hellier.
Yeah.
He's
still the Searcher now on Instagram.
Yeah. This was on the forums back in the day. And I private messaged him, and I said, look, these are the lakes everyone talks about. Have you got any pointers? I only want pointers, blah, blah, blah. Of any others? And fair play to him. He didn't have to reply, but he could see how enthusiastic I was about it. And very few people, a lot of people talked about it. Very few actually did it.
Yeah.
And Nick mentioned a few lakes out east. He had not fished them, but I'm pretty sure he got his information off a guy that sadly passed away now, Mark BMW. I'm not sure. I don't know that. So maybe... that might not be the case, but he knew of these lakes, and he said, why don't you go and try them? They're huge lakes, absolutely huge lakes. And so I looked them up online. I found maybe 2 articles on these lakes. That was it. 2 mentions of carp being in the lakes.
Jeez.
But that was enough for me. That was enough to go on. They were massive lakes. I don't know if this was going to be one of my stories. I don't know if we want.
Yeah, go. You're there. So when's this in terms of your...
So this was 04.
So 04. So really early.
Yeah,
in terms of your
yeah.
expeditions.
So that's what. So that's pretty much 19 years ago.
Yeah.
Basically, I didn't want to do it on my own. Andy was so focused on his UK. He was really into the railway. I think he was even fishing Raisbury at the time.
Right.
He had a.
You didn't fancy any of that. You didn't fancy Raisbury.
Yeah. We haven't spoken about that. I mean, I moved from the east of London. I moved into Blackheath in a house share. Then I bought my first house over in Twickenham, right in the little village of Witton, right by the rugby stadium.
Yeah.
And so the Colne Valley was very close to me.
See, right.
It was just half an hour away. So I was right into the London. By this point, I was joined as consultancy in London. I was doing long hours. I was developing my career. I was really into the London scene of working hard and playing hard. You know, out in the evenings, late in the office doing bids. It was a different world. And I actually joined up Raisbury 2 and Raisbury 1.
Did you?
Yeah. And I fished the island, like Kingsmead Island, as well. And I even did a few trips around Hythe Lagoon in the Mere. And Andy was fishing them, and he had the big one out of Hythe Lagoon. He didn't have the black mirror, but he had a big common out of the Mere that was 41, maybe 42 pound. It was one of the ones that had grown up. It was probably one of the gnome fish that had grown on. But I was. I was doing these long hours. I did, and I ended up, I probably did 4 or 5 nights. The carp were drifting into Bryant's Bay at the time, during the daytime. You could see them with all their backs out of the water. That was good. It was springtime. That was good enough for me. I did 4 or 5 nights in Bryant's. I didn't get a touch. And I dropped back onto Raisbury 2. And even on Raisbury 2, I've got to be honest, bite time on the Colne Valley, particularly on those big places, was typically between maybe 6 a.m. and lunchtime. It was that morning period. I had to be in London for 7:30.
Yeah.
So I was missing out on all of that anyway. And I probably did 15 odd nights on there. Andy was catching. He had actually moved to Raisbury. He was renting above the estate agents in Raisbury Village. So he was on it. He was bang on it.
Yeah.
And he was catching so well. He was baiting all of them. He was catching all the big fish out of all of them. I even photoed, as I said, I photoed Aussie's common for him out of the Silverwing Sailing Club, the Priory, which was the big common in there at the time. And he had the red fish out of the lagoon, which was the biggest fish in the lagoon next to the Mere.
Yeah.
So I was almost living my fishing life through him. And that was good enough for me at that point in my life. I was in my mid to late 20s at the time. I was loving the London scene.
Yeah.
Clapham, nightclubs, all of that. You name it, I was there on a Friday and a Saturday. But I was still doing my French trips. The French trips allowed me I was doing 2 weeks, 2 dedicated weeks in the spring and 1 week in the autumn. And basically that allowed me to zone out. No work, no mates, just go to France with my Michelin A to Z, all on my own, and dedicate my time. And that's what I wanted to do. It was a whole new world where there were no other anglers, and I was catching 50 and 60 pounders. Okay, and there were no other anglers about. I wasn't publicising any of it for over a decade. No one knew anything about it. Sure, Nick knew a bit about it because we were talking a lot, and CC Moore took the odd photo and they stuck it in their catalogue. But apart from that, we kept it very, very quiet, and it was just a wonderful way of life. Don't get me wrong, there were Dutch anglers doing it. There was the odd UK angler
but
doing
it. But
not in anywhere near the crowds that are doing it these days. That was.
Talk to me about you said a couple of big pits east, was it, that Nick told you about?
Yeah. Let's get back to that story. Let me just.
Sorry, mate, I sidetracked you to go to Raisbury. So now we're going back via Raisbury, mate, to
I had a few fish out of Kingsmead Island Lake, but that's another story. Again, they were much smaller then. But going back to the French scene, so Nick, fair play to the guy. He didn't have to tell me anything. He'd mentioned these lakes out east, and I've got a lot of respect for him for coming back to me on that. Andy was into his UK scene on Raisbury, so I called my mate Tim. He was the obvious choice. I'd known Tim since I was 3 years old. Okay, Tim was bang up for it. We were going to go over to this lake. We were going to get our licenses. We were going to dedicate a week on this lake. And it's the same lake, incidentally, that Elliot and Jim Shelley have had a really good session on last April.
Yeah.
Rewind 20 years, that was us arriving on the lake. And again, complete by chance, we'd booked our week for the last week of April. Okay, we didn't know it at the time, but the pike season in France normally starts around the 1st of May. It fluctuates by a couple of days depending on what region of France you're in, but the pike season starts on the 1st of May.
Oh, perfect.
Around there. We didn't know any of this. Again, it was learning as you go. We had booked the last week of April because we just thought that might be a good time to go. And we basically, I read, there was a guy called, I think it was Chris Woodrow, someone Woodrow, who had done an article on how to get there. He hadn't caught much. He caught maybe one or two. But he had said you can either go through France via the tolls, or you can go through Belgium and you can avoid the tolls. We didn't have much money at all at this time. And so we decided to go through Belgium. First mistake of the trip, it was by chance, but there'd been a serious accident on the roads through Belgium, and we lost half a day sitting in traffic. Okay, we got there in the evening, and just seeing the sight of 1,700 acres of water just blew us away like you would not believe. It was just like, imagine catching a carp. If we actually catch a carp out there,
miracle.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle. That's a perfect way of describing it. We had no expectations. We just thought we're going to fish here. Okay. First thing to do, let's see if we can actually find a carp angler, because we're a little bit nervous about fishing a lake if there's not even another carp angler fishing. It was that we were so nervous that we'd actually might have even got the wrong lake. We got the right lake, but who's to say these articles weren't old, or we didn't? There was no history. We didn't know anything about it. But we'll get our tickets first. You need to buy a carte de pêche. You can't do any of that online back then. You have to go to the local tobacco or the local tackle shop to go and get one. But it just so happened, again, stroke of luck, that as we pulled into the campsite on the neighbouring lake, and bearing in mind this is a complex of lakes, we pulled into the campsite and there was a little booth with an elderly couple in there. And they spoke English, and this is on the German border, so it's way out east.
Right.
They spoke English, and they said, "Yeah, we can give you licenses."
Results,
like results straight away. Absolutely, we've saved potentially half a day here. We got our licenses. We said, "There's no night fishing, is there?" We knew there wasn't. They said, "No, strictly no night fishing." But they said, "But look, this is in French. How on earth are you guys supposed to know?"
Is that what they said to you?
Yeah.
Fair play to them.
But we weren't going to do that. We were so green to it. We weren't going to be taking any risks like that. So we basically got our tickets. We were going to start looking around the next morning. It was real late. And again, we didn't have much money, so we just pitched up on the entrance to the campsite as opposed to going in because we didn't want to pay. So it was such scams.
No one pulled you, no? They were fine.
No, all fine with it. We put our profiles up right at the beginning, pulled the van up on a grass verge, had a couple of stubbies, and set the alarm for silly o'clock to go looking round. And I swear to God, with this Michelin A to Z, we spent the entire day going down dead end tracks, trying to find our way to suitable access points. By the end of that day, we were absolutely knackered, but we picked 3 spots that were reasonable access. There was some grassy area in the campsite. Most of it was private jetties going out with boats moored up, with little gates with a padlock on. We didn't really want to be getting involved in any of that. So we agreed that there was this lovely pier that went out that wasn't private. It had reed lines down each side and it had open water. We hadn't seen any carp. They didn't jump. There was no jumping. It was boiling hot. That's another thing to point out. It was roasting hot. It was probably 25 degrees in late April, which was it was actually a really good thing, because all these big waters need a bit of heat to warm up. Those carp will not start moving around so much until there's either a major wind or there's a bit of heat in the water. And so again, we got fortunate with that. But we decided we would go the next morning. We'd get up early and we'd go onto this jetty and we'd put rods out either side and we'd boat some in my little Speedhawk boat.
Yeah.
Again, we didn't have a motor. We had one boat between us. But that's a bit of advice for anyone thinking about this. You don't need to go with all the kit. It might be easier for you, but you've got to start somewhere. And English anglers have got a very good average standard. They're very good in comparison. That's probably controversial, but they're a very good standard with regards to finding fish, watercraft, baiting, casting. I've seen it all across the Europe. They are good standard. Don't think that you need to have the greatest echo sounder, the greatest motor, all that. You don't. But anyway, we had this. We went out onto this jetty the next morning, and there were 2 fucking lanterns at the end of it. Excuse my language. There were 2 lanterns at the end of it, and there were 2 roach pole anglers that were fishing in the dark for roach for the pot. No, I'm not joking. And we were like, oh my God, all that work, and we still haven't even got a line in the water. So we said, right, we'll go to the end of the harbour, we'll get my boat out, we'll get your echo out. He had one of these old Hummingbird echo sounders, and we'll go out and we'll have a good look in the main part of the lake. We couldn't fish anywhere around there. So we pumped up my boat. It was one of these pumps. It wasn't a foot pump. And we went out into this main area of water. We got 100 yards out. We heard, and the boat had a puncture.
No.
But we had it was a slow puncher, and basically I said, I'll do the rowing, you do the pumping.
Yeah.
So I'm rowing, Tim's pumping away like this. It was
what a scene.
Oh my God. It was, if anyone was watching, it was the most calamitous, embarrassing scene ever. And of course, the Hummingbird sticky thing that holds
probe or whatever
that
it is.
holds the transducer.
Oh yeah, okay.
Wasn't sticking to the boat. So 1 minute he's bent over the edge of the boat holding the transducer. The next minute he's pumping while I'm rowing. Oh, it was a sight.
Did you make it back?
It was an absolute disaster. Yeah, we carried on going out. It was going down slowly. God. Oh yeah. From a health and safety perspective, I certainly wouldn't recommend it. But we went out into this central section. We went 1 kilometre out into the lake. It's huge lake. That's a huge lake. And we went to this wonderful reed line on the other side. I mean, from what we could see on the echo sounder, it went straight down to 5 metres and it was flat. There was no features, no obvious features. But out on this other reed line, bearing in mind at this point, we're starting to question the whole thing. We've been.
What if there's carp in there at all?
If there's carp in there, have we just made a huge mistake? Have we bitten off more than we can chew? This is just.
Yes.
And we were genuinely thinking at this point, this is an absolute write-off. This is complete write-off of a week. We got to the other side. The reeds and the weed looked lovely, but there was no possible way to fish it. They came right out into the water, but there was a tiny little black hole over in the corner. I said, let's just go and have a look over there. And Tim's like, really? So rowing over there. And as we got closer, we saw a set of rods hanging, coming out of this hole. And we looked at each other, huge sigh of relief across our faces. There are carp in here.
Let's go and punish
There are
these
carp in
cunts.
here. Back confidence restored. There are carp in here. We found a carp angler. It was still really early in the morning, so we didn't want to disturb him. So we made our way the other way, and we found a small flavouring bottle that was tethered to the bottom. It was like, there can't be any carp anglers. It's 400 metres from the bank to here. But so we just kind of carried on going, and it looked more and more carpy. But Tim was saying, we can't fish over here. We can't. We've got a puncher in the boat. We can't get our stuff over here. Let's just go and fish the dam wall. We're right next to the dam wall. And all that was going through my mind was that we're in springtime. It's boiling hot.
Yeah.
The carp are going to be in the shallow water. It's the last place we want to be going, Tim. And he's like, let's just get our rods out. And I said, okay, let's just do it. What a decision that was, right? Get a bait in the water. Word of advice, if you've got a bait in the water, you've got a chance, right? So we went back to the bank, and this is another part of the story. Basically, we were rowing back to the bank, and we'd been out in the water for several hours. And the week before the pike season starts, it's a tradition for the French anglers to go down to their boats, to re-waterproof them, creosote their boats up, have a bit of a social. Cup of tea, talk about where they're going to be fishing, what part of the lake, what live baits they're going to be using, whatever they talk about. Right. The president, some old bloke is with them, right? And they're staring at these two people, strictly no night fishing on these lakes. These two, the van is in full view with all the gear on top of the roof, etc. And we're boating back to this. And they all just stop talking and they just watch this coming in. So we're in trouble now. And they said, President, into pêche nuit, into D. Basically, we weren't even night fishing. We were just looking around. And we were like, okay. And Tim's like, let's just get the fuck out of here. and so we got in the van. We drove back to where the dam wall started, further back. We didn't have barriers with us. We grabbed a couple of rods. We got a big bag of beer. We needed a beer at this point. And we traipsed another kilometre up the dam wall and we just chucked the rods out off the dam wall. And it was just like, thank God we've got a line in the water. We've been blood, sweat and tears for the best part of 2 days. We've actually got a line in the water. No surprise. We put, basically these rocks went down at maybe a 45-degree angle and we were putting baits in just over the edge of the rocks, probably 10, 15 yards out. 20 baits around each rod, standard fishing. No surprise we didn't get touch. Okay. But we were actually fishing and said, let's concentrate on here. We'll come back tomorrow. So we put a couple of kilos in all across this dam wall and we went back in the morning. We went back to the campsite, absolutely dejected, knackered, all the rest of it. Pitched up on the entrance to the campsite because we couldn't afford to get a pitch in the site, and then set the alarm for silly o'clock. Dragged him out of the sleeping bag at 3 a.m. It was just like, what are we doing? Yeah. What are we doing? Made our way up. It's a steep drop on this dam wall. It's probably about a 6 or 7 metre drop down rocks before you can get to the rods. Anyway, I threaded 2 24mm baits onto this rig. Big baits, a big long hair. Walked down these rocks, lobbed it out. 20 baits over the top. Went back up for my second rod. As I got to the top, the Delcam just went and just absolutely melted. Tim, I've got a take. And this rod is just melting off out into open water. And I run down these rocks, I hit into it, and this fish must take 100 yards of line on its first run. And Tim's at my side. I wanted to fish this side, blah, blah, blah. Didn't I tell you were going to get a bite here, blah, blah. I'm like, Tim, help me out here. Grab the net. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I got this fish in, and it was a 21-pound mirror. It was amazing. Yeah. It was all we could hope for and more. Let's get the rods out. So Tim went down. We'd tossed a coin, by the way, for this spot. Right. We were at this big pipe that separated the dam wall from another lake behind. I think there was a mesh in the pipe, so I don't think the carp could swim through. No. But it was an obvious kind of feature on this dam wall. We had tossed a coin. We both wanted to fish there, and I won it. But anyway, Tim was just down the bank. It was a relatively even dam wall, and we had rods out all across it. And at lunchtime, I had another take. And this is another point to add. This is springtime. The roach had started spawning. And but if you can imagine, I think it's in South Africa, they have the sardine run, where you have from a drone, all you can see, the water is black for miles. Yeah. And you can see all of the dolphins, all the seals, all the sharks, maybe a few killer whales, all attacking these sardines. It was roach spawning season, and for whatever reason, the roach that year had decided to spawn in the rocks on this dam wall. Okay, they could come into the rocks, and there were a lot of dead ones as well, but the roach was spawning. And it epitomises everything you got to love about rural France, huge inland sea, miles and miles of roach just coming into spawn. And then the pike, the zander and the catfish smashing them. And it was just an amazing sight to see all this happening in front of us. And I assumed I had this twitchy take. It was caught up in the rocks and then it came free and there was nothing there. I assumed one of the predators had grabbed the line as they were going for these roach. Anyway, chuck the rod back out. Same thing happened a couple of hours later. Only this time the rod flicked up off the rocks and flew off into open water. And it was another carp. It was, to cut a long story short, it was a 27-pounder. And I'd had 2. And that evening, Tim had a 25. So we'd had 3. We put a load of bait in and we thought, we are on to a winner here. They're coming in. And little did we know that night that the weather was going to change and a big westerly came in. We went back to the campsite. We woke up in the morning and it was raining. The westerly had come in and it was charged. Of course, you didn't have apps back then.
No.
We had no idea what the weather was going to do. So we'd had this hot period followed by a low pressure system, which is the perfect environment for carp to feed in the springtime. They've got to heat up, and then the weather comes in, and on this westerly, we thought these carp are going to be there. They're going to be on our pre-bait. So we traipsed this way up the dam wall. We didn't have any bed chairs or anything with us. We were sleeping on the rod holders because we couldn't carry them. They were so heavy. And we got within 20 yards of this spot, and we saw 2 bivvies.
No.
And it was like 3 days of blood, sweat and tears to create what we considered to be an opportunity of a lifetime. And two Dutch guys had come in illegally during the night and bivvied up over our spot. And I wasn't quite as chilled as I am now when I was 24.
Really? You lose it?
I just lost. I did lose it.
What'd you do?
I was whatever they were going to do, I was going to fish there. Whatever they were going to say or do, they had done it illegally. We'd followed by the book. This wasn't right in my eyes, and so I basically thought, my God, blood pressure must have been way up. And I said they were fast asleep in their bivvies. Their rods weren't actually out. They were going to put their baited heavy with a boat all up the dam wall, and they were going to put their rods out when they woke up. And I said, we've done it by the rules, blah, blah, blah. We're fishing here, blah, blah, blah. I honestly felt like this wasn't right. And so I just started setting up. Next to them in their swim.
Oh my God.
I didn't really know what was going to happen. And all of a sudden the bivvy door was zipped down.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my God, Tim, are you ready for this? Tim fucked off down to his swim.
There's no one in Tim's swim?
No, there was no one in his swim. They were right on mine.
Oh, good stuff.
So he had gone down to his swim. I was potentially faced with 2 angry Dutch guys all on my own. But anyway, the first thing he said to me, he said, look, it looks like we're going to have to cut a deal. He could see how upset I was. I was literally on the verge of tears. If you can imagine, we hadn't had any sleep. We'd tried so hard.
Battered.
We were absolutely battered. And he could see I was more than emotional about the situation. Clearly we caught a couple of fish and we thought we were onto something. And for him to say that all of a sudden, blood pressure drops. And I said, I'm sorry I went off on one, but we've put so much effort into this. He said, no problem. We'll fish this side, you fish that side. We'll cover it. There's plenty of room along here. And fair play to him. He didn't have to do that.
No, he could have told you to.
Yeah, exactly. He could have. It
could have been pretty tasty.
Yeah,
mate.
It could have been.
That's a 50-50, isn't it? That is, isn't it?
I don't know. I quite fancy myself at 24. No,
two Dutch blokes.
So anyway, rods went out, profile up, straight to sleep. I woke up to take at 2 p.m. I slept from 4 until 2, and I got a take, and it was a wonderful 20-pounder. I ran down to get Tim. These Dutch guys hadn't caught anything, and Tim had 3 in the sacks. And his rod was just melting off while I was standing there. And as we stood there, he said, "This is unbelievable. I've got 2 upper 30s down here." And as he did that, he said, "That's yours, mate." And basically, it wasn't a shoal; it was an army of carp. An army had come in this westerly. And it probably helped by these Dutch anglers' bait that were put out. We put a few kilos out. They had absolutely filled it in.
But they weren't having any runs.
No, they did start as the fish moved down. They started getting runs as well. And it was just it was carnage all across the dam wall. And I'm going to cut a long story short at this stage, but over the course of the remainder of the week, for the 4 days we had left, Tim and I had 65 carp.
Jesus.
65 carp in that period of time. So if you can imagine how many that is a day, it was just ridiculous fishing. Mainly 20s and 30s, and a few low 40s, which were PBs for us. It was an unbelievable situation we found ourselves in. And right at the very end, on the last 2 days that we were there, 2 other Dutch guys started walking up and down the damn wall. And by the way, after that first night, we thought if they're fishing on the bank, we won't put our rods out at night, but we're going to we're going to fish in comfort. We're not going to go back to that bloody campsite 20-minute drive away. We'll get our bivvies, we'll get our bed chairs and sleeping bags and actually fish in an element of comfort. And we'll fish today, but we'll keep out of the way. We'll put our bivvies behind the trees, but we'll fish at night, fish during the day only. And that was a blessing in disguise. But these 2 Dutch anglers kept walking up and down. There was an older chap and a younger chap. And they said, my God, every time we walk down here, you're into a fish, mate. And I said, it's unbelievable, isn't it? They said, look, do you mind if we drop in after you? And we said, no problem, no problem. They went and got all their stuff. They set up this wonderful eating tent with their bivvies either side of it. It was something out of a blooming palace that they had erected. And you know, fishing's not just about fishing. It's about the people you meet.
Definitely.
We got talking to these guys and they said, we'll cook you dinner tonight. Come and have dinner with us, okay? Really nice blokes. You know, we'd let them come in and fish our spots. And basically I had 2, Tim had his rods in, I'd left 2. The 2 remaining rods left in the water were out. And they had cooked up this gourmet chicken and salad, and we'd been eating blooming pot noodles for the entire time. And they brought in this wonderful meal, and they had a proper like picnic table with 4 seats around it, and we were eating this food and talking. They had done a lot of time on Shantycott, and it was one of the best decisions of my life to keep his phone number. This chap called Kes Delder. He was working for Richworth. It was Kes Delder and Ruud Hageman, I think his surname is. And they were Richworth boys at the time, but they've since gone on to Strategy. But to take their phone number, you know, France is a lot about close contacts, networking, trusting contacts that you know aren't going to take information. And he's turned into one of my best mates. He came, you know, we know his family, he knows ours. We now see each other maybe once every year, maybe once every couple of years. And he came to my 40th the other year. We'll go over and visit them. They live in The Hague in Amsterdam. So we'll go over there and we've kept in contact for 20 years now. And they love doing the same sort of thing I do. So believe it or not, they actually have more time at it than I do. So I learn a lot just off them. How they fish, where they go, what they do. Yeah. And we'll come on to it, but it's a lot about those close contacts. And just at the very end of that trip, when I had my 2 rods left in the water, at 10 o'clock, at 9 o'clock, one of them went, it was a 28 pounder. I'll just put that back. The last rod that went in the water went, and it was the biggest fish of the trip. It was a 47 pounder. It was a wonderful fish. And the following, I'm just going to very briefly touch on the following year. We went back on the last week of May. Okay, I'd actually done another trip to the region on my own. It was my first solo effort, but we went back to the exact same spot on a big westerly in the last week of May, and we had exactly the same. We had over 60 carp between us, and Tim had a 60, and he actually repeated. I think 1,700 acres of water. He repeated the big one that I had. I'd had it at 47. He had it at 49. The following year. Mad. Yeah, isn't it mad? And he had a 60, 61 maybe it was.
That's huge.
And for us at that point in our lives, it was just, you know, and basically it was just incredible fishing. It's all changed now because it's nothing like that now. I mean, Jim and Elliot had a very, very good session, but I still don't think it would have been quite like what we had back then. Fish have definitely grown a bit. But there's a lot more people fished it.
Yeah, pressure. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It changes their habits. I mean, to be fair, if they'd probably stayed for the whole week, they probably could have had 60 fish maybe. But it was just an unbelievable time. Unbelievable time.
What about other chapters? Obviously, that resonates pretty high, the sort of start of things. And we're going to talk later on sort of generally about this whole French thing, the vlogging, everything like that. But for you, where sort of else or other trips or other captures really resonate? I know another thing that we'll talk about as well is sort of, you talked about network and close contact, but also your respectful nature in how you've done it. You have publicised it, but you haven't given full detail, names, etc., to everything to sort of really put it out there. But for you, what are those significant sort of chapters over that course of time?
Yeah, so that was one, undoubtedly. That was one. And as the years went on, I was pushing myself. I wanted bigger waters. I wanted bigger carp. I wanted more of a challenge. I didn't care. We had a session in 2006 where you'll overlay a couple of photos. I had the big common out of the lake. It's a very well-known lake, and it's the lake where I went back and had. It was on YouTube. I had the session, what I titled "The Session of a Lifetime."
Yeah, I remember that
when I had the big end. But we went there in 2006 and we had a great year. But from fishing there, I'd heard about this lake down the road. Okay, it was 300-400 acres. You might call it 600-700 acres if you attach the next lake onto it. And at certain times of the year, the fish could move between them. But really, the lake in question, City Centre Lake in Lyon, has been well publicised in recent years. But we're going back a long, long time now, and this to me was one of the most significant chapters. I was always trying to go one step further. Even then, I'd almost got to the point where I was less interested in the circuit waters, and I was more interested in really going wild and big. And this lake kind of fit. I knew there were real big carp in there, but there was. It had a reputation for being incredibly hostile.
Yeah.
And it was the obvious place to try next. And Tim and I, we'd done really well somewhere else. I can't remember where. In 2006, we said, let's go and have a look. Let's go and give it a go for a couple of nights. Had a couple of nights left. And we went round to the North Lake. It was a very wet time. It was wet weather. It was probably only 15 degrees. And there was no one in the park. It's a big park lake. There's no one in there. We went round to the north bank of this lake, and there was a group of homeless people on the north bank there. Right, we found the place closest to park, and it was quite a long way away from these people. But there were maybe a group of. I mean, now the lake is very well guarded, okay, and that would never have been allowed now. But back in 2006, it wasn't. There was, there were maybe 2 park guards that could take it or leave it type thing. And this group of what I think were homeless people or travelling type people, they were with their what do you call it? Where people have a person, their support person. They have a support person.
Oh, like a support worker.
Like a support worker.
Yeah.
They were in groups of 6 or 7 with support workers. And they were having a barbecue. And it was one of these, they were doing a presentation whereby every so often, I couldn't understand them, every so often everyone would do a round of applause. And it was quite clearly where so-and-so had been off the heroin or whatever for so many days.
Okay.
And or methadone or whatever it was they were on, they'd been off it and they were clean. But they were drinking heavily. They were drinking bottles of spirits. And they had a bunch of dogs with them that were pretty aggressive. But they were going through this presentation, lots of clapping. Me and Tim were like, we don't like the look of this. This is exactly as we've heard this part.
Yeah.
This is the reputation is coming true to us. Oh my God. And when you've got a van full of stuff, it takes a bit of time to get the boats out, pump them up. And we got these boats out and these people started drifting. The support workers had gone home and they started drifting towards us, interested in what the hell we were up to. No one in the park. Guys are pumping boats up.
What's going on?
And as they started drifting towards us, we knew straight away the car wouldn't have lasted the night. It would not have lasted the night there. and they came round the van, just asking questions, but they were all drunk, and they were the most dodgy people you can imagine. And we just said, let's go. Boat straight onto the roof, ratchet strap across, let's get out of there. And that was our first experience of the lake. But we'd seen this most magnificent lake of bars, systems of bars, weed beds, islands. It was everything a carp angler would want. No other anglers and more. It was just paradise. But we had to somehow hurdle this situation around the lake. So we went off somewhere else, and that was the end of that trip.
Oh, so you didn't fish another part of that lake?
No, that was just the preliminary checkout. But the following trip, the following spring, solo week for me. I always had 1 week with Tim, 1 week solo. My solo week, I was going back there. I was fishing that lake one way or another, no matter what, So there's another lake real close by where I could, with a campsite. Now the campsite, you can't stay on it. It's just chalets, so you have to order a chalet. And
Right.
Mark Kaufman, who fishes over there a bit, he always gets a chalet. But at the time, back then, you could camp on it. So my plan was, it was all well thought out. It was about a 2 kilometre bike ride from the campsite across to the lake.
Yeah.
And through dirt tracks. They're now beautifully pathed, beautifully designed cycle paths, but back then it was just dirt tracks with a few barriers, and I didn't have a key for the barriers, but the way to get round to the lake from the campsite was actually to go back out onto the motorway, drive round and go back in, which was probably a 15-20 minute drive through a few towns, through a few motorways to get back round there. But you could go direct on the bike. So I went up onto this campsite. There was no one fishing on the campsite into the other lake. So I just pitched up my bivvy, got the car off the back, drove straight over there. I'd driven through the night. I liked to drive through the night back then because I was still on my Michelin A to Z. I didn't have a sat-nav, and I would quite regularly go wrong. And it's a dangerous thing. You're trying to hold this bloody great map up.
And try and
all on your own. But that's how keen I was. I was just mad keen for it. I didn't care what I went through. I was fishing that lake. And I got on the bike and I got over there. Few wrong turns on the bike. Eventually I got over there. And I went round this lake. I was so tired and thirsty. And there appeared to be no one fishing. But on the north bank, right on this big beach where there's a big bar as well, it was a big Zodiac, huge great white Zodiac on the bank. It was clearly a carp angler. I was like, my God, I'm going to have to go and have a chat with him.
Yeah.
I need to learn a bit about how I'm going to play this if I'm going to fish there. And I went round to this guy, and this guy had this bivvy up. And he took one look at me, and he was French, and he said, and I said, I'm English. And amazingly, he spoke perfect English. I mean, how rare is that back in 2007?
Yeah.
He spoke perfect English. He said, would you like a drink? And he had a plastic cup ready. He poured me a water. I was like, thank you so much. Down this water, gave me another one. I had to just sit down and rehydrate and recover from the cycling the drive and the cycling I'd done. It was all 100 miles an hour. It still is, to be honest.
Yeah.
When you've only got 5 to 7 days to go,
It goes quick, doesn't it?
It goes one or two wrong turns. You've lost a day. Wrong calls. So I got around there. I rehydrated us, and he said, "You want to fish this lake?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Okay, fine." He said he had been dropped off by his wife. Okay, and she had gone away with the car. He would never leave the car on the lake.
Yeah.
But once you're actually on the lake, you're okay. He said, if you go onto the islands, big trouble from the guards. It's a definite no-no.
That's a no-no.
But if you fish on the bank, it's all changed now. You're relatively okay if you stay on the bank. You might get told to leave, but that's the worst that can happen to you.
You're relatively okay.
Yeah, I know. I was a little bit unsure about this. Anyway, he was there for the weekend. It was a Saturday. Okay, I was fishing. And he said, and the wind was pushing into this bank. It was a huge lake, big wind coming in. My God, you're in the right spot.
Yeah.
He said, why don't you go and fish down that way? He said, there are a lot of geese down that way. And I said, what the hell's geese? There's no geese on there. I said, what do you mean geese? He meant gays. Right.
He meant what?
and he said, sorry, gaze. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? Basically, this North Bank was a pickup joint further down. And it was a drug dealing spot. It was a pickup joint. All the worst things you could possibly imagine were going on. I was like, right, I'm definitely not going down that way. And it was right in the city centre, okay? It was a big, we all know where it was. And this North Bank was pretty much a no-go zone.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh my goodness me.
What, and he just said go down there?
He said don't go down there.
Right.
No, he said don't fish down that way. So I was like, right, I'm definitely not fishing down there. But he said, by all means, go up to my right somewhere. So it's like, okay, I'm going to do it. Anyway, while we were talking, another French angler came in to say hello. He wasn't fishing. He'd just popped down for the social. Okay. They got talking in French, and this guy's name was Matteo, and he didn't speak a word of English. They got talking in French, and basically Matteo had said to Bernard, John can leave his car up at the restaurant area, up at the bar, okay, as long as he puts it tight to the bar. There's a guard dog called Scar, big black Alsatian, who will keep an eye on it for him. Trust, no word of a lie. Anyone gets close to that car,
he goes mental.
He goes mental. I was like, a plan is starting to come together here. Okay, so I was like, we're onto it. We've got a plan. I'm going to fish up to your right. I'm going to park there. I'm going to get my boat out here. Blah blah blah. This is the one. Okay, I'm actually fishing this lake that's got rumours about this huge carp. It's magnificent. My God, it's going to happen. Okay, so I'm hacking it back to my 2 miles or however far it is back to the campsite.
Tour de France.
Oh, yeah. Got my stuff. Another pint of water. Back to the lake. I've offloaded all my kit. I've parked up. And I'm fishing. This is amazing. I'm actually fishing this lake. And I had an Echo at this point, and I had a new boat. This new boat was a bad idea. It's called a pickle, which basically it's not got a flat bottom to it. That's another word of advice. Get flat bottom boats if you're going to get a hard one. It was a hard bottom boat that I could get onto the roof of my my Golf at the time, and it rocked around in these waves. But anyway, I got 4 baits in the water. Rumours were that this lake was full of poisson chat, but it was still early April time. So I had 2 rods on tigers, 2 rods on boilies, and I just put them in. Found something that felt relatively clear. Couple were long range, couple were short. There was a lot of dead weed on the bottom, but I was fishing this lake, and I had the security of this guard dog up at the your
car.
The car, and I had Bernard just one down for me, maybe 200 yards down the bank. This was feeling a bit safer than what it was like when I'd been the year before. And down to the water from the car park is a good 7 metre drop. So anything going on up there, they've got to drop down a horror, and people don't tend to do that if they're looking to deal drugs or whatever they were doing.
Yes, keep it easy.
They're going to keep it easy. Yeah. They're not going to come down to the water. So I felt relatively safe. Night went by. Didn't get a touch. No real surprise. We're on a huge lake, blah, blah, blah. At some point mid-morning, 10, 11, I see Bernard out in the boat, okay? And he's playing a carp. And I jogged it down to help him out with it. And he was rowing back. He didn't have a motor. He was rowing back with his carp. And it was a 55-pounder.
Ooh.
It was a monster. And it was these beautiful browns and yellows and purples. It was looked like it'd been uncaught. It was the most magnificent carp. And I'm like, the first fish I've seen is over 50 pounds on this lake.
Yeah.
This is a worldie. And he was clearly really excited about it. He's like, John, you have to come in with me on this photo, blah, blah, blah. A really nice bloke. And yeah, I'm in on this photo with him. And I know.
What
I know, it was all a bit weird. And
you've got to keep him close though. He's a good contact, isn't he?
Real good contact. Macho was down talking. He was really, really friendly, really nice people. And he'd actually come during that night. He'd actually come up with a bottle of Jack Daniels in the evening, and we got on it. And he spoke good English. And I got to know a guy on the first night on a new lake. That's another great thing about doing this sort of thing. You get to meet some brilliant people. Night 2 came, Bernard had gone. I was all on my own. Okay. Yeah.
Left to the savages, mate.
Twitchy arse time again. And the wind was crashing in that second night. I'd actually had to I remember now, it was so long ago, I wedged my profile in between these two bushes because you couldn't get the pegs in because it was so gravelly. And at some point during the night, the guard dog had come down to the water, and it basically was patrolling the waterline. I was like, hang on a minute, aren't you supposed to be up looking after my car? And it came down, and it just sat next to me. Real nice dog. He had and he liked bread. I know you shouldn't give dogs so much gluten, but he liked bread. I had a load of spare bread. And this dog literally curled up underneath my bed chair and he went to sleep. So I felt as safe as houses.
Well, your car weren't safe, no?
No, I can't. I think I was probably trusting the situation now that was going to be all right. The car was there for the next few days. It was all right. But going back to that night, it was the second night on the lake. The dog was now under my bed chair. Wind was cracking in, and as every wave came in, the blooming alarms were going beep, 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 beep like this. And at some point at around 4 or 5 in the morning, it just went, as a big wave came in, it went beep, beep, beep. And one of the rods has just absolutely melted off. It was on one of the longer range rods that was on a rock solid gravel bar, probably in about 2 meters of water. The water was right up at the time because there'd been so much rain. And normally that spot is maybe 6 foot, but it was a bit deeper. Maybe it was, normally it's about 4 foot, but it was about 6 foot. And it just roared into life. It was. I remember the rig exactly. All well, long shank size 6 hook, tiger nut with a bit of fake maize over the top, with several big scoops of hemp and tigers.
You dropped it, right? It wasn't cast, was it?
No, dropped. Yeah. It was dropped. It was probably about 120 meters offshore, so it was quite a long way out. And I hit into this fish in these waves. And it was straight away, it buried itself in some old dying weed from the year before. But I was on braid. I'd learnt my lesson at this point that you need both braid and mono when you're fishing in France for whatever situation you're in. I was on braid, and I was able to give it. I couldn't have gone out in the waves with that boat, this horrible rocking pickle boat. I couldn't have gone out, so I just gave it the good one, and it came free. Okay, and it came free, and it just felt like I was pulling in a big lump of weed all the way in. And the only point there was no kicking, no shaking of the head. It just came in like a bream. And as it came in, the only point that I realised that I actually had something on the end was that as it came in, it didn't come in directly towards me. It came in about 10 yards to my right. So my line was kiting right, hardly any distance. And it had gone across the other two lines. And I just gave it a little bit of side strain. I see a tiny little dimple on the surface, turned it, and it just came straight into the net. And I
load of weed on its head, or just was it completely?
And I got it in the net. There was no weed on its head, and I looked into the net, and there was a carp bigger than I'd ever seen in my life. It was by far a personal best for me. It was the biggest fish by some distance. I'd had a 57. Common, but this was been way
bigger than that.
Way bigger.
Oh my god!
And the euphoria that went through me at that point, I just screamed up into the air, yes! Like this. It just meant so much to me that this lake had been on my mind for probably a couple of years, and I'd been there, done it, and now I'd got the blooming picture or whatever you say. It was just an amazing moment. This dog had come out. It was nibbling around my ankles, really excited by this shout that I made.
Yeah.
I weighed it there and then. It was 28.5 kilos, which is
what's that?
I think it's about 62. I can't remember the exact weight. Around 62 pounds.
It's an absolute kipper.
It was a monstrous fish, and I sacked it up. There was a log in the water, and I could tie the sack to the log. And I didn't go back to sleep. I was just absolutely buzzing off the situation that had just happened. And come morning, I didn't know how I was going to get this. I wanted a photo with this carp. It was my personal best. Nick was actually up the road with Mike Brown from CC Moore.
Oh, right.
They were just 45 minutes up the road. But of course, back in those days, you put your phone off at night. Everyone did. You didn't have chargers or anything like that. You didn't have, tablet type phones where you could see what was going on. You just had little text phones, your old Nokias, and everyone put it off at night. And of course, he had put it off at night. And he hadn't turned it on, and people wouldn't turn them on. If they were low on battery, you would have to be going back to the car to charge it. So his phone wasn't on, and I could see that because my text hadn't been delivered. So I was traipsing up and down this bank. What do I do? There was no one else as far as I could see on the lake. Maybe Geert Ooms from Holland was on the island. He's also another very famous angler. Maybe he was on there with a friend of his, but I wasn't sure about that. So I didn't know what to do. So in the end, I packed all my stuff, stashed it in between these two bushes, ran up to the car with the fish in the set. Again, I wouldn't promote this. Got in the car and drove round to the other lake where I put my camping pitch up to see if there were any anglers over there. It was about a 15-minute drive away. I wasn't leaving it long. And thank God there were 3 Belgians on the campsite fishing out on this other lake. Thank God. And I jogged it down to the water and I said, look, I've got a fish in the sack. I'm desperate for a photo of it. It's 28.5 kilos. And I said, I'll drop you back straight afterwards. I'll drive you around there. They said, yeah, fine. We'll bring our car. We're really interested. We'll bring our cameras, blah, blah, blah. And they left the youngest of them with the rods. Yeah. And they jumped in their car and followed me around. Thank God I didn't take a wrong turning on the motorway. Because again, you're trying to play this. You've got no sat-nav. You're trying to play it out onto the main road, onto the dual carriage, round onto the A46 or 42, motorway down, and then taking the right junction off. You can easily go wrong.
Yeah, easy.
And they're following me. But thank God I didn't make any mistakes. Half an hour later, we were back in the swim and ready to photo this carp. And yeah, fair play to them. We reweighed it. It weighed exactly the same weight, 28.5 kilos. Amazing. Just an amazing moment of, when you'd known about this lake, you'd known about the environment, you known about what was in there. And if you just get up and do it, you have a chance. It's like anything in life. If you get up, you get out and you do it, you always have a chance. And after that, I became a little bit, again, I wasn't doing much time at all in France generally or on the lake, but I was getting obsessed with this and I was starting to pick up the stock. And basically Bernard, but would you believe it, the day after Bernard, I hadn't spoken to him, he came down to the lake with supplies for me. He didn't have to do that. He came down with 2 carrier bags. His wife had brought him down 2 carrier bags full of buns and crisps, fruit, everything. Said, I thought you might need some supplies. So he didn't have to do that. Yeah. Amazing. How nice was that? But anyway, he ended up posting to me. He posted to me from back to my UK, he took my address. He posted the pictures of the big fish that he had caught on the lake.
Yeah.
And Macho had also emailed me the pictures of the big fish he had caught. And very gradually, I was starting to build up an album of all the individual carp on the lake. Now, it changed massively at this point because either some carp was stocked or they successfully spawned. But at the time, there were hardly any in there. Just a few fish between maybe 15 and 20 kilos, and then maybe your A team of 10 to 15 real big ones in 300 acres or so.
That's ridiculous.
There might have been a few more than that. There might have been quite a few more than that, but it felt like there weren't many in there. Certainly of the bigger carp. And I'd started putting together an album of all of these carp, and it was this. And then my Dutch friends Kes and Ruud came down. They started fishing the lake, and they had a couple of the big ones, and it was the same old characters getting caught. And it was what I would describe as being the odd uns. There was the odd fish. There was another guy called Alex who was fishing the lake, a French guy, and he was putting his stuff up on either YouTube or online somewhere. I found it.
Right.
Hours and hours of searching for for fish from this lake, and I got all his fish. There's another chap, Jean-Remy Monnier, who also had done a very good session on there and caught a load of the big ones. And you could see all these fish, and there's one called the Pete's fish, one with a scar down its side, and they were the same ones, but in amongst these same ones, there were these odd uns, what could be described as. And these just captivated my mind because these were fish that had grown on this side. With all the poisson chat in there, they had grown to this side on a natural food alone.
Yeah.
And so they were naturally big carp, which to me, really excited me. And basically, I had this album, and there was one other photo that I'd seen where some French chap called Frank, he had a brace of 28 kilos. And again, I didn't take a copy of it, but remember that point. And then the years went on, and of course these younger fish started growing. But and just ever so often one of these odd ones would get caught, maybe a different one. So often I only ever saw one photo of them, and then suddenly bang, 38 kilos come out.
38 kilos
to a French guy, absolute giant of a carp, and it just epitomised everything that I wanted out of a lake. The level of unknown was just off the chart. It just so happened that this 38 kilo was one of the same fish that this guy braced at 28. Oh. So it put on 10 kilos before it then got caught. But it was just so captivating that these fish could go so long and not get caught. It wasn't getting fished like, I'm sure if a lot of anglers were fishing it,
it'd be different.
It would be very different.
Yeah.
But the way people were trying to fish the lake and the level of hostility around there, it was very difficult to fish. And the same things happened again. I went back there in 2013. This was one of my videos. I had a magnificent 43 with an incredible scale pattern on it. That fish then went missing. It did get caught a few times. And again, I tried to keep an eye on what the growth rates were on the place. Didn't get caught. And then all of a sudden it's got caught over 70 pounds. Same fish that's gone from 43 in 2013 to a Dutch chap having it maybe 2 years ago at over 70 pounds.
That's madness.
It's mad. It did get caught in between times once or twice, but it hadn't got caught anywhere near that size. And that just, everything about that lake, just I became obsessed with it. I had all these photos. I never saw photos. A lot of those, I never saw them again, and I assume they died. But those younger fish, with the growth rate that strain of carp had, and the levels of natural food that are in that lake, boomed.
Yeah.
And we've seen other people's results on that lake since. Unfortunately, since it has flooded out pretty badly, a lot of those fish have gone down the river to various sections, and some will never be seen again. But what a place! And that to me was that lake over that period of time. I didn't fish it much at all. I went back a couple of times. I caught a couple more originals of maybe 41 and 42 and 49. Might have scraped 50, that fish, I can't remember. So I did have a few of those original carp, but again, I was doing a few nights here and there.
Yeah.
You're never gonna.
Any time, yeah, of course you do.
Exactly. So that was a pretty key moment for me. It was a key time in my angling career, catching that big carp, and that stayed my PB for a long, long time.
Yeah.
Over 10 years maybe. I did one extra night. Let's just finish the story. I did one extra night on that north bank. I didn't get anything. I decided to go out to the island, which I probably shouldn't have done. There were these magnificently made swims out there from the locals in amongst the bushes.
Right.
It was brilliant. It was like a secret. I can only
oasis,
think. I can imagine it was like the Mere where people are creating little swims on. It was just the same out on these islands. No one could see you, all alone. I really felt good out there. But I had a couple of roach, big roach. They're almost like hybrids over there. They're so bloody big, probably 2-3 pound roach on tigers. But I didn't get any more carp. So I'd done 5 days on there, and I decided to do the last 2 days. It's worth just touching on this point from a safety perspective. I did the last 2 nights on the River Trent, which is about an hour's drive further north. There's a big barge section that joins the River Trent, and in basically at certain times of the year, sometimes in spring, some fish will go in there to spawn. There's loads of places they can spawn. They do actually spawn in the main river a lot these days.
Do they?
Yeah. But at certain times they might go in there. So I wanted to give it a go. I had 2 nights left. And there'd been a lot of, like I said, there'd been a lot of rain, and the river was angry. The River Trent is a huge beast of a river, and it was angry. You could see where there were trees on the bottom that had come down in the flow, creating this huge boil of water. And the only way to get across to this spot was to actually boat across the river in my little pickle boat. And it wasn't the best idea.
That's not the one.
And I went across. I basically loaded up this boat, got the waders on. Definitely a rule that we're going to come on to later in the Carp podcast. But I went across into this area, no problems at all, and did 2 nights in 2 sections, didn't get a touch. There were very few, if any, carp in there, and they certainly weren't feeding. The water level was up high. For whatever reason, I didn't get a touch. That was the end of my week. I'd had 1 60-pounder for the week. But on the way back, I loaded this boat up and perched on the edge of it, to go back across the river. And at some point midway across, you shuffle around a little bit to get a bit more comfortable. I knocked one of the terminals off the motor.
Oh, no.
And it's bungee strapped tight down with bags and rods and everything over the top. And I'd not knocked this. It wasn't one of these days you get nice push fit terminals. This was one where you just edge it on and you turn the nut and tighten it up, and it had come off. And there was no possible way I was getting down to this terminal. I couldn't get down to it, and the oars were buried in amongst the stuff.
Oh, right.
And I'm flying down the river at this point in this flow, perched on the edge, and I'm thinking I could be in a bit of trouble here. I can't even rebalance to get to an oar. I somehow managed to spread my weight across the boat, and I got this oar out. And with one hand, I started to try and make my way across this river with a boat full of skier, and literally my bicep, my forearm were twice the size. I got to the other side, a mile downriver.
Oh, you beauty!
And I then had to anchor the boat up, walk up to get my car, and walk it back again. But if there was a weir or something going on,
mate.
I was in big trouble.
Yeah, goner.
So for people watching, just think about it. It was a stupid, thing that I did, not thinking really. You learn, you live and you learn from these things. But I didn't have a life jacket on. Just make sure you're comfortable in the boat. You're not perched on the edge when you're moving between places in deep or dangerous water. Because, it could be a very different story.
I suppose, as you said before, it is a learning curve. And I think, those sort of predicaments, those sort of things, you're going to encounter them like as much as you can sort of prepare. At the end of the day, it is a learning curve, isn't it?
Yeah, and while we're on the subject of safety, sit down in the boat when you can. And if you're going to stand up, have a life jacket on. And I know I've been guilty about it in a number of my earlier videos, and I've got to hold my hand up to that. But in 2010, on that same water, what can often happen when the water's weedy is that the propeller will get caught in the weed, and then you'll whack it up to force 5 to try and get it out, and all of a sudden the boat will lurch forward. And I was in exactly the same position in 2010. Fortunately, it was midsummer. I'm standing up, and I've not got a steady foothold, and I'm playing a carp. I'm caught in the weed, and I went to try and get it out of the weed. I put it onto 5, and I went back, and I lost my footing completely. And I went over. My head must have missed the battery by a couple of inches. I went over the side of the boat. Fortunately, it was midsummer, so it was lovely and warm. And I just got up, got back in. You know, it was climbed back into the boat. Had lost my rod at this point.
Oh, had you?
I'd lost my rod because I was playing a carp and I'd lost it as I'd fallen off. And it got to, I was out in the boat for hours trying to find that rod, and I had a hooked fish on it, and it got to the morning, and I waited until it got properly light, and I went out for 8 hours and I couldn't get that rod.
Oh my!
And I was like, oh my God! So not only have I lost a rod, but I've lost a fish on a rod.
Yeah.
And then I got to take on another rod, and it went across that line.
Yeah.
Thank God. It went across that line and hooked it up. And this rod must have only been 3 yards from where I fell out of the boat.
Joking.
I've been all round this
couldn't
lake.
find it.
All round this lake looking for this bloody rod. It was no surprise, really. The rod was the reel was quite quickly going to get buried in the weed.
Yeah.
But I've been, everyone was like, what's this guy doing all over the lake for hours and hours, diving in and looking about, and it was right down where I was fishing.
I suppose if you think there's a fish hooked up to it, potentially it could tow it, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And the fish was still attached.
No.
It was double figure common. It's probably about £60 now, but at the time it was double figure common.
What about waders and boats then? What are you saying about this? I know that Elle's done a thing on topography.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been out the boat a couple of times in waders. Always wear a life jacket. The waders will fill with water, and they will weigh you down, but only a little bit. Okay, once they're full of water, you just feel heavier. If you can tread water, you're all right. I don't ever promote it. Don't ever do it.
No, of course.
But you know, with a life jacket on, it's not a massive deal. They can suck to your legs a little bit more, particularly around the feet. So getting them off might be more of an issue. But yeah, you know, they're not going to suck you under, so to speak. But yeah,
safety first.
So, for me, it's sitting down in the boat. I do it as much as I possibly can now, and wear a life jacket, obviously.
Yeah, nice. Before we move on to other chapters, we covered a couple at the moment. I wanted to talk about your choice of venue. Now, throughout your time going to France and sort of your angling becoming synonymous with these sort of trips rather than sort of your average angler that maybe fishes every weekend in England, you have the option, especially over time, where there's lots of big carp that are available, but on pay lakes. There's a lot of pay lakes out there, a lot of, if you like, circuit complexes like there are circuit waters. But I've never seen you really in that realm of French carp fishing. I've always seen you on the sort of public lakes, big expanses of waters, normally a few smaller waters, but mainly that sort of big expansive public lake water. Why is your choice to go abroad generally to France been around that type of venue and not pay lakes? Because there's bigger fish potentially in a lot of the pay lakes.
Yeah, I'm not interested. I've got no interest in that. And you know, if I maybe have 4 or 5 weeks a year to go carp fishing in France, I do miss the social side of it. I like to go for a beer, if that's at the pub or if it's on the lake. And I do miss that side. And if maybe I have 4 or 5 weeks a year, I'm certainly not knocking that style of fishing. I might like to do 1 week where it's less important to me on what I catch and it's more about seeing mates and stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't have that time. And to me, my fishing is so important to me. I want to catch a carp on my terms, on my decisions. A lot of that's taken away from you on a pay lake. I mean, we can talk about the scenery and everything else and the variety of different waters. We'll come on to that. But from a choice perspective, if I turn up to a lake and there's 8 of us and we all pick a number out of a hat, straight away, a load of that choice has been taken away from me. And there's nothing worse than knowing that there are carp rolling over there, but you actually can't get to them because you know someone's fishing over there. And it's also my time is so important to me, and to wake up and look up and see a bunch of other bivvies.
It's not what you want.
It's not what I want.
No.
It's not what. But I'm certainly not knocking it. And like I said, I can see the attraction in hooking up with your mates, having a social, hooking up for breakfast, talking about what you caught. But the idea that you know, you've landed a fish, someone down and said, "Oh yeah, that came out 3 weeks ago. It was £2 bigger." Oh, thanks, mate. That's what goes on the pay
Yeah,
lakes.
yeah. It's a known stock, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah,
as
it's
well?
a very, very known stock. And don't get me wrong, I like to know the stock that I'm going for now these days in public waters, and I do loads of research and pinpointing exactly where I want to go based on what I know about the carp. But I just don't like the idea of and not only that, but the carp are more difficult to catch on the pay lakes. They're hammered,
they're pressured,
from March through to maybe November. Really, really heavy pressure. So when that fish is swimming around, it's going over a number of people's baits, and it's when that carp decides, oh, I'm ready to eat now, I'm going to stop in on Joe Bloggs' spot. That's not, you know, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of focus on rigs and baits in that situation, your application of bait and maybe the length of the rig and all that exciting stuff. I love that. But I want to be able to, you know, as Samir would say, it's about the journey. It's a huge journey in catching a carp from a public lake, from doing the research in the first place to maybe looking at a few other lakes to finding those carp on a huge lake. It's one big process, not necessarily difficult, sometimes difficult. It's a big puzzle that you're trying to solve, okay? And it's not just about what bait and rigs and how many spods you put on that at 70 yards. It's about all of those other different aspects. And not only that, but it's the scenery and waking up to an incredible dawn with wildlife. You can get that on commercial lakes as well. But when you lose yourself in the French countryside, you can see owls, you can see deer, you can see kingfishers, butterflies, everything. It's just wild, and for me that floats my boat. It's a personal thing. I do want to touch just one more on the fact that parts of France are almost in. They've been stopped in time, like And to me, I've been going to France since I was so young. It almost feels like my second home. But there's that part of a trip where you can go to the local boulangerie, where people have been going to that boulangerie for 100 years. Okay, you can go to the local coffee shop in a village in the middle of nowhere and get a cup of coffee in the morning or a beer in the afternoon. An example: I went to the Pyrenees about 3 years ago. Okay, and it was grape picking season, so all the tractors were out picking the grapes. There was a woman, no word of a lie, in a tiny little village in the middle of the mountains, who had taken a trailer. She was in her 80s. She had a big hunchback. She was loading logs onto that trailer, stocking up for winter, where she probably lived in a little cottage down the road, which didn't have central heating. She probably had a log burner that was her one source of heat. And she's probably been doing that for 60 years. Yeah. Okay? And that's a beautiful thing. That culture, that way of life, I mean, you know, capitalism, commercialism, whatever you want to call it, is starting to win in France, and supermarkets are starting to get more prominent, and you're starting to lose that. But there are still pockets of that going on, and that's something that I love to see, and it's all part of the public adventure that maybe you don't get quite so much of if you wanted to go to a
I think you said
place.
it early doors, your sort of first experiences of going onto a big French lake and it being raw and wild. And you're basically, in a sense, still searching for that same that same set of circumstances.
And while and I like the physical challenge as well. You know, it's good to keep fit, and that is a physical challenge. Don't get me wrong, moving about, lugging batteries about, all of that. You know, it's all part of the fun for me.
Yeah, fair dues. You said, and also you referenced time. Now, obviously, bringing this forward a bit, you obviously have a family, you have a busy job, you have a lot of things whereby your time is taken up. How do you legislate? Obviously, you stagger your trips, if you like, and periodise them throughout the course of the year. But things like family holidays and legislating time in amongst that, how does that all play out and work?
Well, we have a deal. Me and my wife. I don't do the UK fishing anymore. Okay, so it's not like I'm off for a night a week, blah, blah, blah. We have a deal whereby I'll be the good dad for most of the time. when my wife's always a good wife as well, but in terms of reading to the children reading to me, doing their homework, all those important things, I'm a massive part of that. So it's almost like building up your brownie points. I hope she doesn't watch this. She'll probably have got bored by now, but if I can build up those brownie points and try and be a good dad for most of the time, then we've ever since she's known me, I've done these French trips. Okay, and as stupid as it sounded in those early years, it's something I've always done. So it's not like it's any change to our way of life. And the fact that I don't go off every week in the UK means that there's almost an entitlement. And at the same time, she's allowed to go off with her girly mates and do whatever they want. They still go to Ibiza every year. I used to love that when I was younger. I've completely changed my tune on where my priorities lie these days.
Been there, done that. I'm on the.
I want to go.
I want to go.
Exactly. And I can go to the pub with my mates on an evening. That's quite good enough for me. I don't need to go on the lads' holiday anymore. If I've got any opportunity to go away, I'm going to go to France fishing. End of. So we've got a good deal on. I have that 5 to 7 day trip in the spring and the 5 to 7 in the autumn. I missed that this year, but I'm going to do winter instead. And I know some friends that have had good results in winter, so it's not all a loss as long as you get a low pressure system. But in terms of the family holiday part, in the middle, again, as long as my wife has got a pool. So it's an expensive one. Yeah. We'll normally do a week at a campsite and a week at a villa with a pool to mix it up a bit. The children love they love the pool as well, but on the campsite there's loads more activities to do and all the rest of it. As long as she gets a pool and she can read a book, I can look after the children during the day. I'm only really away for those hours at night. And as long as it's secure, which we always get somewhere with a decent electric gate or whatever, they're fine. Yeah. They're fine. So we've got a pretty good deal. I don't know how long it's going to last because she keeps talking about Italy and other places, but there are carp in those countries. But in France, I know a little bit of the language, okay? Yeah. And I feel ever so comfortable in France. And there's still so many places that I want to try. Next year, I'm not going to go into detail where I'm going next year.
No, of course not.
So I've already booked it up. So excited about next summer's holiday.
Your intel, obviously a lot of this public waters, that if you buy your sort of license to go out and fish online or you buy it from wherever when you're out in France, there is an awful lot of water on that ticket. Now, there's obviously different connotations and different rules and legislation around each of the venues, and that's obviously up to you to decipher. But for you, when you're out there and you've done it for a period of time, you've obviously built up a network, you've built up a wealth of information. You talked there about the previous venue where you started to know the stock. How does somebody, or how do you go about unpicking that? Is it through just people you meet on the way? Obviously now there's the use of social media, but not everybody's going to want to be forthcoming with information with regards to that, are they?
No, absolutely. A lot of it, like I said earlier, you've got your close contacts, whether that's 3 or 5 or 7, around that sort of people that are in the know. And you're not going to know everything, but over the years, you build up a vision. I've built up a vision of all the lakes that are of interest to me, where they are across France, and how I might go about putting a plan together to put a trip together. And without that vision, and that vision has come as a combination of what I see on social media, what research I've done myself over the years, where I've visited before, and what's on the grapevine. And I try and put it together on an order of priority of where I really fancy. And it's what I call the social media vine cycle. Every lake will be at a certain stage of its social media vine cycle. And that cycle might be anywhere from 5 to 10 years, whereby it might be off it completely and no one really talks about it, or it might have gone through a cycle and it might be at the start of a new cycle, or it might be somewhere in between. And obviously as the videos come out and I'm as guilty as the next person for putting those videos out. More and more people will go towards those lakes over the next year or the next 2. So it's about picking those lakes at the right time in their vine cycle. Half grapevine, half social media, which is why I call it that. And I'll give you an example. I did a video in 2018 where I went to a lake. I'd known about the lake since 2007, actually, because Bernard, who I'd met on the other lake, he started fishing it. Okay. And he had caught some good carp out of it. And I'd heard this from Matteo, the other French guy. But it kind of gone off radar. I went with Tim for just a couple of nights in November 2013, and we caught a couple of fish. But at the time, just one, maybe 2 videos had been done on it. There's a chap called Joachim from the Lot Experience, who does the
River Lot,
River Lot excursions. He had fished it with a couple of his friends. They'd had caught a few 20-kilo fish, maybe up to 22, 23. But that was 2013 time, okay? And then in 2017, another close contact of mine went, and he had a really good result, much bigger and many more carp. And I sent Tim over there the next year, and he also had a reasonable result, had a really nice carp and some really good backups. And so in June 2018, for me, it was right at its peak. Few people have fished it, not so much. And so when we spoke earlier about an adventure versus a project, this was a project.
Yeah, one venue.
I'd learned a little bit about how people had caught them. I'm going there. I only have 5 days, so I couldn't really do the adventure anyway. I was going to go onto that lake and I was going to focus. To cut a long story short, I caught a lot of big carp. I caught 3 of the real big ones. But since then, loads of people have started going there. Okay. Loads of people have started going there. Loads of videos have been done on it. And those 3 carp, I had a 55, which is now 62. I had a 57 that's now 67. And I had this big one I had, which was 65. It's now, Gareth's mate had it at 67. But those were 3 of the real big ones in that. And all the 20 kilos fish, I had 8 others over 20 kilos.
Jeez,
they're all now 25 kilos. So, but the thing is, anyone who goes there now might get one of them. They might get 2, but generally speaking, on a dedicated session, they might get one of the big uns. There's other big uns in there, but I had loads in one session. That was nothing to do with my angling ability, nothing to do with it at all. It was all to do with the fact I'd got the lake on the right position of the cycle.
Timing,
timing. And now those fish will always get bigger as more bait goes in. But they'll become more difficult to catch and with more pressure, as we all know. So I would rather have a massive hit and maybe not get them at their absolute maxed out weight, as opposed to, and let's be fair, I still enjoy going to other places where other people have got it right. And I'm quite happy to try and I'll be right at the back of the cycle. And I'm quite happy just to catch a couple of fish. But what you've got to try and do to keep ahead of the trend, so to speak, every so often you've got to try and pick one of those lakes. It might be a bit of a risk, but you've got to pick it right in its cycle.
And they're your focus sort of projects, aren't they? They're not your adventure trips where you flip around and,
that's right, and
hit them up.
And I'm going more towards the projects these days than the adventures. And my mate Tim, who still does it, he's an excellent angler anyway, but he's more of a project person. And if you stay on that venue, you've got a better chance of figuring it out and then catching a real good one. 100%. It's a bit more boring, and sometimes you start scratching your head, and it's like I need to move on. And some people just can't do it, but it's definitely the way to catch bigger carp. I'm more than certain that the bigger fish will come, particularly over an established period of time when you've been establishing bait. Undoubtedly.
But if you want to catch one, if you go to a venue and there's nothing and you move to the next venue and drop on them, eventually you're probably a better chance of actually catching if you're hitting a venue where they're going.
Yeah, 100%.
Do you reckon in terms of like overall sort of importance for you, location is sort of number one? Or would you say?
Undoubtedly. Location is always going to be the first and foremost thing, because if you don't find them, these lakes are very, very big, and typically the fish are shoalfish.
Yeah.
You could be many, many miles from them. Certainly on the lakes that I've fished in the far southwest of the country, you have got the lowest stock per acre in any of the lakes in France. 14,000 acres with just a handful of carp in them.
Jesus. Yeah.
And on them, you could be many miles from those carp. So location is always the most important
How
thing.
are you finding them? You got a drone? Are you using that?
No.
What are you doing?
Luck, no. We'll often go there on a family holiday, okay, which means my sessions are limited to just short sessions anyway. So people say, why on earth would you bother? But if you go heavy baiting, and I'm talking really heavy baiting.
What's heavy baiting? Give me a quantity.
So I'll normally go with 150 kilo boilie.
Okay.
But I will go straight to the local garden centre, and I'll get several sacks of dry maize, and I'll take my Burko in the trailer,
Right,
and I'll cook it up myself, because you can get maize pretty cheap over in France for 25 kilo sack, and if you start regularly applying it to an area, those carp can come in on it, and as long as no one else fishes that area, if we go on holidays for two, if I'm lucky, 3 weeks in the summer, and you bait for that first week, there's no point sometimes. There's just no point in putting those rods out for until several baits have gone in. And when I had my best result, I literally had a sack of bait, old bait, that where you've come back from your trip, you've chucked it in the garage and it's dried out. So it's all the old stuff,
yeah,
and it's all gone rock hard air dried. It's horrible stuff, as most people would look at it. That's perfect for these lakes in midsummer. Remember, midsummer is when the nuisance species are their most active.
Yeah,
At their highest, everything's active. Crayfish, poisson chat, roach, bream, crucian carp, you name it, they're on your bait. So that bait won't last long anyway, so you want it hard. And I literally had 2 sacks, and I've got a scoop, and I'm just putting it everywhere. And then and probably put 20 kilos in. The next day, I've put 5 in, ready for the following day, and I'll fish the early morning. And when I've caught carp, it's normally been within minutes of putting the rod out.
Yeah, of course.
And then the moment it comes light, I've got to pack up anyway. So you could argue, what an unbelievable waste of bait. You're only fishing for a few hours over all that bait. But to me, that fish that I caught 2 wonderful 40s that are in many, many acres of water. And I know people that have fished on that lake for weeks and weeks on end and not caught anything. And so those fish, to me, no one's going to really see that from the video, but those fish personally to me are so important.
Yeah.
They're from somewhere where not many people would consider doing a session, let alone a video. All right, you might if you dedicate a proper trip to it. So that's really important to me. So location's most important, 100%. And look, Samir does brilliantly by going around finding the carp and just fishing a small patch of bait.
Yeah, little traps.
Little traps, exactly. There's so many ways you can catch a carp, aren't there? And if I'm on a dedicated session, there's no point in fitting it in. That's the last thing you should be doing. But if you can build a swim and the fish start coming in, I'm certain that's the better way to catch the big ones. But of course, location is the most important thing, and then following location. There's 101 things we could talk about.
Where are you on rigs and bait? Well, bait we know, but rigs wise, mate, like
so
overly riggy.
So on the bait, let's just finish off on the bait front. On the bait front, as a rule of thumb, I'll typically go with 20s and 24s.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I do prefer a softer bait if I can get away with it. But I will always shrink wrap my bait.
Hook baits?
Always shrink wrap the hook.
Okay.
Yeah, the hook bait. And people say, I'm not sure about that. And how many times do you see people say, we've just realised that the crays or the shats are active, we're going to have to wrap them for the second night. For me, if I'm on a 5 or 6 night session, I've lost 15% of my session because I didn't wrap them on the first. And with 2 tiny trips a year, I can't afford that. I can't afford to lose that night. potentially a big carp coming that night. So for me, I have to wrap it. I don't think it makes much, if any, difference to whether or not, these carp are normally hungry carp, and they're
of course.
So I don't really want to take that risk of losing the baits on the first night. And then rig wise, I like to keep it slightly longer than the I like to keep it maybe between 8 and 12 inch hook link. And for me, the most important thing is keeping it strong, robust gauge of wire on the hook. Hooks is such a big topic. I'm so into hooks. And for me, the gauge of the wire, particularly when you fish the rivers, is more important. Because
that looks savage.
The one thing that people lose most of carp on is the pressure they put on that fish. Obviously, in the rivers, all that fish needs to do is turn on its side, go down with the flow, and before it's even gone on a run, and the current will be holding it. So I'm on the brutes. I lost a couple of fish on size 2. The size 2 twisters, and I went on to the brutes just because they're the real brutish wire. I had to use them. The point of the hook needs to almost have a bit of thickness to it. That sounds so crude, but the real sharp points.
No, that's just going to be absolutely turned over in a second.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be turned over. So I go with strong tackle generally as a rule of thumb, and you've got to think about other factors like. If it's windy, use a stronger hook. You would be amazed if you're out in those waves and your boat is being pulled down by the wind and that fish is going in the other direction. You're putting more pressure on than you would normally put on. So if it's going to be on a big wind, up your hook size or up the gauge of the wire on your hook. Things like that are so easily overlooked. Traditionally, I'll go with a semi-fixed setup with a big fat lead.
Bottom baits generally, not so much pop-ups.
Bit of both. I would say more bottom baits and more snowman. Yeah. I like the idea. As you're lowering that lead in, you want it to drop away from your lead. Yeah. And so any balance bait is going to do that. The reason I prefer a snowman to a balance bait is that as that carp's feeding, it's not always the case. As a rule of thumb. Sometimes that little pop-up will hit the top lip of that as it's moving around. Obviously, they're flush to the bottom if you put particle, and I tend to keep away from particle. I'll fish with tiger nuts and peanuts, but generally, as a rule of thumb, I won't go any smaller than a peanut. Hemp.
Why? Do you think they're just too small? They're just stuck to the bottom, literally?
Well, no, I think the roach will come in and cause you problems. Yeah. It's a rule of thumb, not all the time. Just on some of the places. So I'd like to keep big baits to try and keep them at bay, so to speak. But I think the idea of a snowman, sometimes that little pop-up can touch the top lip and turn, or a barbel and turn them so the fish will turn and take it. But I'm not massively into colours, if I'm honest. If I'm using a snowman, I'm typically using a match the hatch. I have used bright ones on one or two occasions. I've noticed a difference where the bright yellows or the pinks have caught me more carp. But I'm more of the opinion that if I'm baiting with a certain type, I don't want them to think, "Oh, what's that?" And I've seen it. So you see it on some of the underwaters where they will home in on the pink or whatever colour. Okay, yeah. You see that. Normally, you see that on quite heavily stocked venues.
Definitely.
All my best sessions have been done on where I've used match the hatch hook baits. So if it ain't bust, I'm going to stick with that.
Yeah, no, fair.
But typically, I'm liking the skin link in a 20-25 pound.
Yeah.
Real strong stuff.
Yeah,
that's typical. I do prefer a coated braid again, because it'll float away, and I'll use a big sinker on there to keep it nailed down. Always have mono and braided.
You talked about this before. So for you, when does mono come into play as opposed to braid? Because I think traditionally we've seen quite a lot of boat work done with braid.
Yeah. So if I'm fishing the canals in either central or northern France, you're fishing at close quarters, you do want a bit of stretch in that. So I'll use mono in the canals. They will have weed beds, but with 20-pound bullet mono, you can, which is a 0.4 diameter, that's the minimum I'll go with. You can normally pull them out. So I will pretty much always go with mono on that, or if the water's really clear. Okay, but nothing over. If you're fishing anything over 100 yards, you've got to respect that the stretch in that mono is going to lose indication. But there's some times where I will use mono at range. So in the springtime, around April and May, when all of normally it's sallow is not around a lot of lakes, which is a type of willow, and all the fluff will come off those come the blossom basically. Yeah. It will come off and it will fall into the water. That will pick braid up in the water. Okay. And often on these big lakes, I've experienced it loads of times, that will congregate, accumulate, and it can drag a very, very big lead. Whereas if you fish the mono, the stretch in the mono will not drag your lead. And the mono, it doesn't pinch onto it so much. On the braid, it will always get clogged up in your tip. Up in your tip ring. Not quite so much with the mono. Still does do it. And there's other times where I've been fishing weedy lakes where you have rafts of weed, huge rafts of weed that might be 20 metres long, and you're fishing over that to somewhere many, many metres further out. And that weed will move in the night, even if there's no wind. It will just drift. And with braid, that will just drag your lead. Sometimes you have to use the mono and just fish on single bleeps. Any sort of movement of that rod tip or any drop back or pick up, you've got to be out in the boat. And 9 times out of 10, it's a carp take. Sometimes it might be something else. And you have to go through the pain of redoing that rod. But there are occasions where I will use mono at range, but generally speaking, you want the sensitivity of the braid. And I'll on the big spools like the LR 10,000s, I will put 1/3 of 30-pound Power Pro, 2/3 of 50-pound Power Pro. Right. And the 50, it's called a 0.36 diameter. It's when it beds down on the spool, it's way, way thicker than that, or so you can't get anywhere near on as much as you could for, say, the bullet mono. So I will do 1/3. If you do 1/3, maybe 30-pound, and then 2/3 50-pound. Right. That will give you plenty of line. I would say probably 400 meters or so. I don't think you need too much more than that.
Fair dues. They're useful. That's very useful to talk about, especially braid and the sort of the mono. And
I've
really thought about it in that manner.
Plenty of years I've gone through with using braid straight through. Yeah. I've started using the Nash snag leaders now. I've joined, and I'm big fan. All bright, they're not together, and I normally put quite a long distance because there have been a couple of occasions where I have hit rocks and snags on the river, and that saved me. That snag leader saved me. There's also a level of stretch in it.
How much do you put of that? How much are you talking?
I normally put a bit more than maybe most people. I might put 20 metres on, even if the water's just 5 metres deep. Right. I'll put a bit more on.
So you got a bit more security.
More security, and also I can snip a bit off and retie the lead if the end bit gets frayed for whatever reason. Yeah. You can snip a bit off and still use it. So I'm quite liking. And not only that, but you can use that straight through to your leg clip without leg core. Yeah. And it's it's virtually invisible underwater. Yeah. So that's another little edge, so to speak.
Nice. You were talking before. I took you on this absolute massive segue. You were talking before about significant chapters. We ended on there with an absolute mega fish at that lake in Lyon. Any others that sort of resonate with you? Over the course of time, you've done a lot.
Yeah. I mean,
an awful lot.
Goodness me. So we've talked about the Eastern France ones. We've talked about, like you said, the city centre, the big one. I was reluctant to go into too much about the videos because people can see them on the videos. What's happened in the last year. So I'm going to keep it outside of that. We went to a lake. Tim and I went to a lake. Probably in 2008 or 2009. and again, I think you could possibly overlay a photo on this one, where we were on this I think Nick had told us about that lake again, actually. He had fished there. He said, why don't you go and give it a go? We moved down to this lake, which was very close to the River Rhone, and it was almost like an oxbow lake. It was as though the lake did once form part of the river, and at some point, the sediment or whatever had grown up and it had become a lake. But it was a reasonably well stocked lake, and we thought we would give it. We'd been somewhere else before, but we had a few days left, so we thought we would go down there. And there was no one else on the lake, and it's a wonderful thing when there's no one else fishing there. And we got down to this lake. There's a ski, it's a water ski section in the middle of the lake, and then each side you've got a beach at one end and you've got a load of snags at the other. But the whole of the far side is covered in snags. Real thick, horrible trees. What they call at Rainbow, they would call it woodwork. Really, it's sunken trees in the water. And we decided to go up the beach end. We weren't sure about night fishing the lake. Apparently you could, but it was one of those questions, but there were no signs of anything like that. Straight away, we parked up on this beach area. Some bloke told us that we couldn't park there. We were like, oh my God, we're going to get chucked off straight away. But he said, don't worry, you just park your car out there. You can still night fish there. And we went out so it was great. It was a great start. And we thought we would fish all our rods to the far side. And it was probably a 200-metre row to the far side. So you had to use braid because of the snags. And ideally, quite fortunately, I had braid all the way through. They were big pit spools. And I had this 39-pound Dynon on all rods, which was real ropey braid. And we basically just put all these rods to the far side. Straight away, we started getting takes.
Right.
On all rods. Unbelievable situation. Basically, the depth went out. It gradually tailed off, dropped into 10 metres, came up to a 4-metre shelf. And then and the snags were all over this 4-metre shelf. Some of them even went down into the big 10-metre dip. But if you could get a bait on that 4-metre shelf, it was dynamite. And I was fishing closest to the ski centre. Tim was fishing to the left. And we had all our rods out and we started catching carp straight away. There was a very, very good stock in there. And the first couple of days went by and it was all great. We were catching and then it went quiet. And what was so interesting about it, we found that the moment the crayfish, and this goes against all logic and theory, when the crayfish came in on the boilies, the carp went away. And it was only, this is so mad because that just doesn't make any sense.
No.
It was only when you rebaited those rods, okay, with fresh bait and a load of fresh boilies, they would come back in again. And that was like everything that you know and understand, because carp definitely eat crayfish.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of what they eat, this is an interesting point. They will always, in my experience, they will always prefer the mollusks to the crayfish. If you go onto a lake that's got both the mollusks, which are the round shellfish, a little bit like freshwater mussels, but more round. I've always found when you pick up a carp out of the sack, there will often be cray claws and cray bits and pieces in that sack. Yeah. But they're more on the lakes where there's both. We always found that there were more shell in there, which was quite an interesting thing. But on this lake, it just so happened, for whatever reason, that something about the crays put off the carp. Maybe it was nothing to do with that. Maybe it was just coincidence. But for 2 days solid, we found this, that if your bait hadn't gone in the morning and you were getting beat where the crays were hammering it, and you bring in and your bait had claw marks all over it, that was where you weren't getting takes. It was only when you rebaited and redid the rod, it would go, which was fascinating for us. But then on that trip, at some point in day 3 or 4, there was some big carp in there. We both got simultaneous takes. I had mine on tigers, and Tim had his on a boilie. And of course, you're fishing miles out, okay, and you really you've got to bring these fish away from the snags. You can't jump in the boat straight away because that's a lost fish. Yeah. We learnt that very quickly. You have to do we're on a beach area and you have to do maybe a 20-yard walk up the bank, holding. No one likes to do that, you know. And we did lose a couple of fish doing that. But on this occasion, both of us walked up the bank, excuse me, run back to the water, walk up the bank again. We got these 2 fish free. Because there were so many lines out, we were playing some of them from the bank. And these fish started kiting. Okay, they kited towards each other, and they crossed. Oof. And they crossed, and then they went under each other and crossed back. No. So we were basically we were both playing each other. It was one of those points where Tim, 100 yards down the bank, or maybe 50 yards down the bank, was almost playing me, and I was playing him. Whose braid is stronger?
Yeah, exactly.
So we figured out what was going on. We came together so we could both pull the rods
same point, yeah,
to exactly the same point. And it was just a bird's nest of braid. But between these 2 carp, one was a 20, one was just a submarine coming in, all shaking their heads, panicking at each other.
Yeah.
What was going on? And we both looked and we were like, that is well over 50 pounds. That is absolutely giant. Get them in the net, get them in the net. Whose is which? And the big one had a couple of tigers hanging out of his
boy, yes.
And it's like, that's my one. I can't believe it. Tim's like, are you? Whatever. and again, I think you took a photo. It was many years before any of the videoing happened, and that was a memorable capture. I think it went 54-ish, something like that. But again, we were young kids. We weren't really that experienced in it, and we had caught such a big carp. So I think that probably goes down with the big one from the city centre and those trips early on in those early years are some of the best ones. I could tell you loads of others, but maybe we'll.
Mate, you're part of our shit, mate. So you're coming back in for sure.
Yeah, we'll save that for another one.
I wanted to talk about vlogging. Now, I don't know when the first vlog went live on the old CC Moors, but as I said, I was an ad. Literally every episode I'd watch. I thought they were really, really good. They were raw. They were very but the type of fishing was very, like, there was an excitement there. There was something new. It was ahead of its time. There's a lot of people now that are going out to Europe and doing the things that you were doing a very long time ago, and rightly so, because it looks a brilliant type of angling to get involved in. For you, the step to vlog all this, how did that come to be? Because obviously you're not in the industry in terms of sort of a media role at the time. You got your own job and you're going out and you're doing your own trips. But where did this come on? Was it a CC Moores thing? Was it your own conscious choice?
No. So it was my own idea. But let's take it back. I mean, very few people were doing it.
Yeah.
Any videos that were going on out there were typically of anglers fishing commercials, and they were clipping up X number of wraps to a spot, baiting it, and you know, there was a lot of marketing, understandably, but there were loads of videos of doing that in France, people catching wonderful big fish. There were very few. Of course, people have been doing it, and there had been some early videos of it, but there were very few people that were actually going on the adventure type trips.
Yeah.
And those that had done it, you know, the whole concept of sticking a load of music to a video. I mean, I did a couple of blogs personally for myself in those very early years that never saw the light of day. No one's ever seen them. I've still got them sitting on my hard drive at home. And what it gave to me was that there's so much to catching a carp. I see a photo that could be caught anywhere from anyone on any lake, particularly if there's bushes in the background. You don't know what's... Whereas the blog actually gave me a personal memory of the entire story of what had been going on. And then you put a bit of music to it, all of a sudden it seems 10 times better than it really was. And so for me, it was all a personal thing to start with. And it was giving me this memory of the entire puzzle that had been solved in getting to catching that carp.
It's like a documentary then. It's completely like...
And that was so much more powerful than a photo.
Yeah.
You can put a photo in any catalogue, but it doesn't really mean much until you know what's gone behind that capture. And I felt quite strongly about that. But I've got to, and there were a couple of blogs that had come out that I thought, wow, these are good. This is exactly what I do. And
what blogs were they?
So they were more collages of images more than anything. But Michael Peeler and Mark Hoffman had just started doing it, just about at the same time as me, really. And they had put a couple out. I think they had done one in the Alps. Mainly photos, maybe the odd bit of video. And I thought, wow, that's really good. That's exactly what I do. Maybe I'll give myself a go. Maybe I'll video a trip. But I've got to admit, I was in two minds about it. I was in two minds because I didn't really want... this sounds pretty cheap, to be honest, but I didn't really want to expose what had been kept such a big secret for so long.
Yeah. Massive responsibility.
Yeah, and I knew some people would hate me for it, friends and people, and they did. And I don't blame them for that. I don't blame them one bit. Because, but it was always going to come out. It was whether it was me or someone else, it was going to be the way the market went, because there's only so much spomming at 70 yards to the gravel spot that you can do with glugs and all the rest of it. So it was going to diversify away from that at some point. So I thought, well, I may as well. And the first one I really thought about doing, I was on Tet Door, which, believe it or not, Alan and Ollie went several years later to do. I was there, and Mark Hoffman was opposite me, and he was vlogging. And I thought, well, if he's bloody going to do it, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And I was, and he was. We were both catching, and I'd had such a good session that session. I videoed all of it. I thought, I've got the content here. This is a good starter. So I thought, sod it, I'm going to do it. I'm going to send this. I knew Ian at CC Moore anyway. He'd been supplying me with bait for goodness knows how long, and he knew that I was into catching this big wild carp from France, and he loved it. So I said to Ian, I've got this footage. Do you want to have a look at it? And he gave it straight to Alan Welsh, who was at CC Moore at the time. And Alan said, I'd like to meet you. Let's go through it. Let's talk through it. And in those first 3 or 4, I mean, Alan lived down west, Stallbridge way, and he would drive up. I was living in Witton, in Twickenham. He would drive up to the Winning Post pub, and I'd meet him in the pub, and I would have a memory card of all of my stuff, and he'd have his laptop, and we would download it all onto his laptop. And he would drink his orange juice lemonade, I'd drink beer. And we would talk all about carp. He would talk about all his Burfield exploits. I would talk all about my French runs. We'd have a great time. Yeah. And then he would take my stuff and he'd go off. And for the first 3 or 4 blogs, he sat, and must have been terribly painful for him, went through every one of my little clips, put it all together. He did a brilliant job, absolutely brilliant job. And he put it all together and made some fantastic videos. And they all went out, and of course they did really well. They initially didn't go on YouTube; they just went on the CC Moore TV. But with time, they went onto YouTube, and that's kind of really where it all started. But I always had the back of in mind, I'd done a bit of editing before, that really I wanted to do this.
Yeah.
And as good as Alan was, and he was very good at it, there would always be a little spot where I would think, maybe I wouldn't have done it that way. To anyone, they wouldn't have known, but in amongst maybe 20 minutes of the camera on the water, there might have been one little show in that I wanted to put in. And of course, Alan might not see that, etc., etc. As good a job as he did, I kind of made up my mind that I wanted to do them myself. And Alan moved on anyway from CC Moore, which made it a lot easier for me to make the call on it, because they were still very keen to supply me with bait in return for stuff. So I just started doing it myself from then on. And they were probably slightly different vibe. I mean, you've always got to weigh up. You've got to understand your audience to start with. And from the analytics that you see, and I do look at them, you can see what age groups look at it. And it's no wonder that the slightly older ones are interested in mine, because I'm an older bloke. And the slightly younger people, maybe not so. And you're always weighing up, well, how much do they want to hear me talking? the older people definitely want to hear the full story. The younger people who are into Instagram, flicking between photos and stuff, they all want action. That's just how it is. And there's a huge part of the industry that I know wants action, but there's a smaller part that are really interested in what journey we've been on, what my thought process is. And some people are going to get bored to hell with that part. And you're not going to get as many views. But for me, some I try and go with the action. Some I try and put a load more talk in it because I really want to say that and I really want to put it into my video. But there's always that little bit of way up and
balance with it all.
Balance with all of it. So you're always thinking about that when you're putting it together. But quite honestly, by the time you've put it all together, you're so sick of it all that you just stick it in the cupboard, and that's once it's gone out, that's it. Don't want to see it again. You don't want to do anything, at least for a long time.
Have you never rewatched it? It's a cool documentation of like your
so
sort of carping,
much.
isn't it?
No, I don't know. You know how much goes into an edit.
Yeah.
God, I'm sick of the sight of seeing my stupid face saying things. No. Once they're done, they're done. And people always comment on YouTube or whatever, and I don't get so involved in that because I'm just so the whole journey of making it is quite long-winded. People won't appreciate that, but it is long-winded.
Yeah.
So I don't rewatch them so much.
What about, have you ever had any sort of negativity towards you from certain episodes doing them? I think you've done them very tactfully when you've done them, mate. As I said, when you've edited them, obviously there's the fish in there, they're recognisable. There's certain bits of background and swims, but not all the time. And obviously there is the element of you having a responsibility if you know people on the venue or whatever, that you don't maybe blow it for the masses, so to speak, so that the lake's 10 times busier. But have you ever had any repercussions from any of that?
Yeah.
Or any negativity on venues when you turn up?
I've had my fair share of threats, my fair share of people, the keyboard warriors, particularly in those earlier years. And I've got to hold my hands up. I did promote possibly the guesting a little bit more than I should have done.
Yeah.
I've got to hold my hand up to that. But a lot of people, particularly anglers that own commercial fisheries and these sort of things, that it's a strict no. They gave me, and I wasn't very well known. So it's almost like if you're not as well known, we think we can have a bit of a pop, a bigger pop at you than perhaps we could with someone better known. But let's face it, there's no difference between someone going to the Mere where you weren't allowed to fish, catching a big one, to going to somewhere in France and there's no difference yet. That's not frowned upon.
Well, that it held in the opposite regard, wasn't it? The Mere, the Black Mirror, was the pinnacle.
I did promote it probably a little bit more than I should have done, but I got loads of negative stuff in those early days.
Death threats?
No.
No one turning up on the bank?
I didn't get death threats. No, I got a few people saying, if you come back to this venue, we're going to do your car in. I've had all of that. Actually, when you're on the bank, the moment they know it's you, it's time for me to leave. Right. I keep myself off radar as much as possible.
Yeah.
That's worked against me, particularly in the Alps. I did the Alps many, many years ago. I went back in 2015, and there were a couple of guys on the lake. They didn't want me there. I had a bite on dusk. It was no night fishing. A couple of the rods were in. One was out still, and I had a take on one of them. And I brought the fish in. By the time the fish was in, it was a little bit darker. And the guy came round and took my ticket and said, we're going to pay you a big fine. You're off my water. You're never going to come here again. And there was nothing I could have done about that. And I know the only reason he did that was because the other guys on the lake had said, John Timmermans is around there. He's doing a vlog. And you get that from time to time, but I try and keep well off radar now from the other anglers on the place because I know there's going to be a level of hostility towards that. There will be. And some places they're as good as gold, some places they're not. It just depends on where and what characters there are on the lake. But I can understand that. I'm not going to, I will always forgive someone if they do something like that. I'm not going to forgive someone online who gives me a whole load of grief and then 3 weeks later starts telling other people that he thinks it's a brilliant video or starts texting me saying, wow, what a trip after I've seen him done, give me a load of abuse. It's just like, go away, mate. So there's.
I enjoyed it, mate. I'm looking forward to seeing what the stuff that you produce for Nash and your sort of ongoing adventures, mate. It'd be great to, to also have you back into a podcast to hear about it, but also to see it in terms of video and where you go about doing things. I wanted to speak just before I give you your quick fire questions.
Oh God, we've got them, have we?
Of course we have.
God.
The future for you now. Obviously, you're here. You're going to produce video content. You're going to carry on doing your sort of adventures. Will it always be limited to France? Will you move further abroad? Will you look anywhere else?
That really depends. There's a lot of unfinished business for me in France. Okay. There's loads of venues, loads of fish I want to catch, loads of places where you might call them a bucket list. You might say I want to catch 25 kilo out of them. There's loads of places that I've got unfinished business. Whether depending on how busy those venues get. I mean, there's loads to explore further afield. It's going to be a big way up, I suppose, as the children get older as well. They're 4 and 6 at the moment, so as they get older, there should be better opportunities where they don't need quite so much nurturing, so to speak. That there'll be better opportunities. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. In the near term, France is at the forefront of my thinking.
I like that,
and it's close as well. I only live an hour from the tunnel, although I believe, the tunnel's getting so bloody expensive now that I might have to start going on the ferry. But
I'm busy, mate, no? I bet you've seen that.
So many, it's so busy. Anglers always come up to you and say, hello, John.
That's nice though, isn't it?
Yeah, lovely. Most of them are going off to the commercial waters, but they appreciate your videos and stuff. So that's lovely to see. Yeah.
Yeah, wicked. Well, mate, I've thoroughly enjoyed this chat. As you're now part of the team, I'm going to get you in definitely again and talk more in depth about certain chapters. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you produce, as I'm sure everybody else is. Before you go,
hit me with it, mate.
You ready? 1 carp, 1 venue, 1 era. They don't all have to be linked with each other, mate. You pick it.
I would go with an era.
Go on.
From 2002 through to 2008.
Oh, nice. What a 6 years. Yeah. Venue?
Have I got to say the venue?
Yeah.
I don't want to say the venue.
You don't want to say the venue. It's in France, though. Is it a French public water?
For me, the Park Lake in Lyon
nice.
grabbed me for a period of time. Not now, because it's all changed. But that captivated me like no other venue has.
1 carp.
God, that's a bloody good question. £77 gold coin that I caught 2 years ago.
Nice. Drum and bass or country and western? You got to listen.
Am
to
I
it on the
allowed
way
to
home.
say dance music?
No, mate. You got to listen to it on the way home. Drum and bass or country and western?
I think probably. Oh goodness me! If I was 20 years ago, it'd be drum and bass. Now it'd probably be country and western.
I'm going to get you a YouTube country and western playlist for the drive home, mate. Carp fishing only in the UK for the rest of your life, or only abroad for the rest of your life?
Well, that's an obvious one. You don't need to hear me answer that.
You need to go to the UK, mate. I think. 3 essentials you couldn't go fishing without.
I think my phone.
Good one.
Yeah. Do I say a jack for the car? That's an important aspect of your fishing. My God, if you get a puncture when you've got a carload of stuff, you need a jack. You need to be able to do it on the side of the road. But in terms of essentials for fishing, I would probably say you don't need a boat. I would go with it's a difficult one. I would go with obviously hooks, reels, and rods. Good
answer, copping out. But I'll give you the jack as an extra, and I'll also give you your phone, because your phone is pretty useful, isn't it? 3 celebs you take on a social. Can be past or present, these celebs.
I would take Rick Mail.
Yeah?
Ricky Gervais.
Oh my God. Animal rights activist Ricky Gervais.
And
Could love that.
And probably a third one. I would take my footballing hero, John Barnes.
John Barnes. Big John. He could rap, couldn't he? Scariest moment on a bank?
I would say it was probably falling out that boat in summer of 2009, and missing that battery by a couple of inches.
What's your idea of carp fishing hell?
Turning up on a busy venue, with one swim available to fish.
Fair dues. Biggest angling influence?
I'm going to go with Andy Little.
Yeah, nice. Final question. Night out on the bank or a night in with the missus, mate?
Night out on the bank.
Fair play. John Timmermans, you've been an absolute legend. Thank you guys for watching and listening. You'll see this man on Nash TV very shortly with his vlogs. You'll see me soon with another Nash Off the Hook podcast. Until then, John, thank you so much, mate.
No, thank you. I've enjoyed it.